Chapter 1663. The bewildering light sea was filled with endless fog and dazzling light. Chernzong did not expect that the Tiangong elder would have a place to stay here. It was a very small island, about a few thousand meters in radius. There were only stones on it, and not a single plant or tree could be seen. The Tiangong elder seemed to have lived here for a long time, so he built a cave abode for himself to live in. The cave abode was surrounded by layers of interlocking seals, which allowed the Tiangong elder to have a good rest and cultivate. The Tiangong elder opened the seal, and Chernzong stepped inside. The cave abode was very simple. The Tiangong elder gestured for Chernzong to sit down, and he sat down across a table from Chernzong. "This old man has been here for decades, and I don't have anything to entertain you with," the Tiangong elder said with a smile. Chernzong waved his hand, and a few jars of wine appeared on the table. These were Chernzong's stock, and Chernzong usually kept them in his storage ring. Seeing the jars of wine, the Tiangong elder's eyes lit up, and he could not wait to reach out and grab one of the jars. He shook his hand slightly, and the mouth of the jar was opened. Suddenly, a strong wine aroma filled the air, and the Tiangong elder was aroused. Chernzong could tell at a glance that the Tiangong elder was also a wine lover. The Tiangong elder immediately took a big gulp, and immediately showed an intoxicated expression. In fact, although Chernzong's wine was not bad, it was still not as good as the best wine. The Tiangong elder had lived for thousands of years, and had drunk a lot of good wine, so Chernzong's jar of wine was really nothing. However, the Tiangong elder still looked satisfied, because he had drunk all the wine he had saved 10 years ago. In other words, he hadn't touched wine for 10 years. He hadn't tasted a single drop. To him, even low-grade wine was delicious. The Tiangong elder only felt the alcohol worm in his stomach ease up after he finished the entire jar. "Young friend, I'm sorry." The Tiangong elder showed a smile, but he was not embarrassed. Instead, he looked very healthy. "I still have some wine here, but it's not very good. If Senior doesn't mind, I'll give you some," Chernzong said with a smile. He waved his hand, and instantly, hundreds of wine jars appeared. Each jar contained about 3 caddies of fine wine. "If that's the case, I won't hold back." The Tiangong elder knew how difficult it was to live without wine. Although he wasn't an alcoholic, there were times when he wanted to drink a few cups. When he wanted to drink but had no wine to drink, the feeling was like a cat scratching his heart with its claws, itching unbearably. If he drank well, these 100 jars of wine would be enough for him to drink for many years. As for having no wine to drink in the future, that was a matter for the future. The Tiangong elder accepted the 100 jars of fine wine without hesitation. He immediately smiled at Chernzong and said, "Young friend, the bewildering light sea is extremely dangerous. Why did you come in?" "I was chased by a strong enemy and had nowhere to run," Chernzong replied, but he didn't give any details. The Tiangong elder didn't intend to ask for details either. "I also offended someone in the past and was chased with nowhere to go. I could only escape into the bewildering light sea. I've been in there for decades." The Tiangong elder smiled bitterly. Although he wasn't weak, there were many people who were stronger than him. Both of them had to enter the bewildering light sea because of danger, so there were similarities. "Senior, after so many years, haven't you tried to leave?" Chernzong asked. Leaving this place was the most important thing to him. "I've been trying, but it's hard to leave." The Tiangong elder smiled bitterly again and said, "For decades, I've only explored the surrounding 100 miles with this small island as the center. Once I go beyond that, I'll get lost and it'll be difficult for me to return here." Chernzong's expression couldn't help but change when he heard that. After decades, he had only explored the surrounding 100 miles. It was difficult to grasp anything further than that. How big was the bewildering light sea? Chernzong didn't know, but at least he was sure that it was very, very big. He didn't know how many times bigger it was than 100 miles. How could he leave? Could it be that he had to stay here forever? Within this 100 miles there are 2 other people besides me. One of them is stronger than me, but not by much. The other is weaker than me, but not by much. The Tiangong elder continued, but these 2 people entered earlier than me. They've been here for a long time, and their temperaments have changed. If you encounter them, you might be in danger. Chernzong was also glad that he met the Tiangong elder. The Tiangong elder's temperament hadn't become distorted because he couldn't find a way out for decades. Otherwise, he would have inevitably fought and fled. This place was too dangerous and full of uncertainty. The danger wasn't just the bewildering light sea itself, but also the cultivators who entered the bewildering light sea. As long as they didn't die, most of them would be affected after a long time. Although Chernzong knew that it would be difficult to leave, he didn't give up hope. He still had a long life ahead of him, and he could continue to try. But before that, he needed to know more about the bewildering light sea. The information about the bewildering light sea that the outside world knew was relatively shallow and simple. The Tiangong elder had stayed in the bewildering light sea for decades, so he definitely knew more. The Tiangong elder also told him everything that he knew. Therefore, Chernzong quickly gained a more intuitive understanding of the bewildering light sea. In fact, it wasn't much. The bewildering light sea was filled with endless fog and dazzling light that would interfere with one's judgment and make one lose their sense of direction. It would also greatly reduce the consumption of divine sense. Chernzong already knew all of this. The important thing was that the fog figures were called fog demons according to the Tiangong elder's name. Fog demons were a kind of existence that only existed in the bewildering light sea. They seemed to be living creatures, but they didn't seem to be. Their bodies were constantly changing, and they could disperse into the fog to launch silent attacks. They could be called peerless assassins. Moreover, fog demons were very difficult to deal with. Ordinary forces couldn't cause them any harm. There were basically 2 ways to kill a fog demon. The first was to grind it, which was to scatter the fog demon over and over again. If this happened too many times, it would be difficult for the fog demon to reform. The second way was to control the extraordinary force of heaven and earth and use it to kill the fog demon. However, the extraordinary force of heaven and earth had to be strong enough. After a fog demon was killed, it would leave behind a fog crystal. The fog crystal was very pure and could assist in cultivation and comprehension. The strength of a fog demon was relatively average. Of course, that was compared to a half-step great saint powerhouse. If it was compared to a saint realm powerhouse, the fog demon's strength was not weak. In addition to fog demons, it is said that there are also fog demons. Fog demons are different from fog demons. They have a physical body and are more powerful. They are completely at the half-step great saint level, the Tiangong elder said. Fog demons. Chernzong's expression turned solemn. However, fog demons are relatively rare. In the past few decades I have only encountered 3, the Tiangong elder said. In addition to fog demons and fog demons, there were also sea beasts. Sea beasts only stayed in the sea, so generally, as long as one didn't enter the water or get too close to the surface, they wouldn't be attacked by sea beasts. Sea beasts were very strong, not inferior to fog demons. They were very terrifying. Little friend Chunxiu, you can stay here for the time being, the Tiangong elder finally said. On one hand, Chunxiu could accompany him for the time being. On the other hand, it was also a kind of protection for Chernzong. After all, Chernzong's cultivation was too low. He was only at the saint realm. Once he encountered danger here, it would be difficult for him to deal with it. Then I'll have to trouble Senior first, Chernzong did not refuse. It was good to have a relatively safe place to stay. At least for a while, he didn't have to worry about any danger attacking him at any time. He didn't need to be on high alert all the time. In addition, he could also cultivate here and improve his strength as much as possible. Only by becoming stronger would he have the ability to cross the bewildering light sea. Senior, I wonder if you can forge a divine sense weapon for this junior? Chen Zong asked, staring at the Tiangong elder with some hope in his eyes. A divine sense weapon. The Tiangong elder was slightly surprised. He didn't expect that Chen Zong would need to forge such a divine sense weapon. This also meant that he had a method to control a divine sense weapon. Of course, a divine sense weapon was driven by divine sense. Without the corresponding method, it could be driven, but it wouldn't be able to display its full power. Do you have a forging blueprint? The Tiangong elder asked. Chen Zong immediately took out the blueprint he had drawn and handed it to the Tiangong elder. The Tiangong elder couldn't wait to take it and flip it open. He looked at it carefully and soon became immersed in it. The Tiangong elder liked drinking, but he liked forging even more. These were his two hobbies. A quarter of an hour passed. Half an hour passed. After half an hour, the Tiangong elder raised his head. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. The Tiangong elder couldn't help but praise. This divine sense weapon is really exquisite. It can be used alone or more can be controlled. It can also be combined to increase its power. Senior, I wonder if you can forge it? Chen Zong asked. The Tianlingzi didn't have much confidence, so he didn't know if the Tiangong elder could do it. After all, he didn't have enough materials. Although it's very exquisite and difficult to forge, if I have some time to study it carefully, I'm still very confident. The Tiangong elder's tone was calm, but it revealed an amazing confidence in his forging skills. Hearing this, Chen Zong immediately showed a touch of joy. As long as he could successfully forge a divine sense weapon, the second part of the divine sense upper technique could be truly displayed. When that time came, it would be more helpful to him in battle, and his strength would increase. Chen Zong increasingly understood the importance of strength, and he increasingly wanted to be more powerful. After that, Chen Zong temporarily stayed on this small island with the Tiangong elder as his companion. However, Chen Zong spent most of his time cultivating. After all, strength was very important. If he wanted to leave this place, the stronger he was, the better. The Tiangong elder was also completely immersed in analyzing the mysteries of the divine sense weapon. He would only forge it when he had enough confidence, otherwise it would only be a waste of materials. Time slowly passed. It was difficult to feel the flow of time in the bewildering light ocean, but the Tiangong elder forged a little thing that could be used to determine how much time had passed. 10 days. During these 10 days, Chen Zong had been cultivating, but the increase in his cultivation and strength was very small, almost negligible. On the other hand, Old Man of Heaven Craftsman had also finished researching the Imperial God weapon and was preparing to forge it. Chapter 1664. The small island, which was thousands of meters long, stood in the middle of the bewildering light ocean. It was surrounded by countless fog, but the fog and dazzling light on the island were relatively sparse. Chen Zong was cultivating wholeheartedly. Under the strong sense of crisis, the effect of this kind of cultivation seemed to be more obvious. However, the environment in the bewildering light ocean was actually very bad. The qi of heaven and earth was thin and mixed, which was not conducive to absorption. It was also a troublesome process to refine it. However, Chen Zong had the purple world incineration fire, so it was fine. As for the Tiangong elder, he took the materials given by Chen Zong and wholeheartedly devoted himself to the forging of the royal god armament. The Tiangong elder, who had the 9th level fusion heaven unique fire, was a real master in forging, and his forging ability was much better than Tianlingzi's. Even so, the Tiangong elder did not dare to be negligent. This was his first time forging a spiritual sense weapon. There were not many materials. If he failed, it would be difficult to find suitable materials. Time flew. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 days had passed. About a month had passed since Chen Zong fell into the bewildering light ocean. A burst of hearty laughter suddenly sounded, full of joy and excitement, which woke Chen Zong up from his cultivation. "Little friend, come and take a look. This old man has successfully forged a royal god armament." The Tiangong elder's voice entered Chen Zong's ears, which immediately made Chen Zong happy. His figure flashed and immediately appeared in front of the Tiangong elder. The Tiangong elder had something in his hand. It was about a foot long and completely black, as if it could absorb all the light. At a glance, it seemed to absorb Chen Zong's gaze. This foot-long, thumb-wide, pitch-black thing was as thin as a piece of paper. It looked like a sword blade, but it also had a simple and unremarkable aura. However, Chen Zong could keenly perceive an indescribable aura fluctuation from it. The aura was obscure, but Chen Zong felt it was very familiar. It was the aura fluctuation of divine consciousness. He did not stretch out his hand, but he released the power of his divine sense, which instantly enveloped the black blade. It trembled slightly, and seemed to emit an almost undetectable trembling sound. Then, it flew up from the Tiangong elder's hand and gradually rose. At first, Chen Zong felt a little awkward, but it disappeared in a few breaths. It was replaced by proficiency, as if it was an extension of his arm. Under the control of his divine sense, the black sword began to spin. At first, it was very slow, but it gradually sped up. In the end, it broke through the air like a black stream of light. Extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they appeared 1,000 meters away and stopped steadily. Although they were 1,000 meters apart, Chen Zong could completely control them. It was a wonderful feeling. The old man of heaven's craftsman watched from the side. Chen Zong immediately used the spirit raining technique to control the black sword blade. It was the spirit raining weapon. Suddenly, a feeling of blood connection arose spontaneously. If using divine sense to control the spirit raining weapon was a very simple control, then using the second part of the spirit raining technique to control it was a high-level control. It was like the difference between a blacksmith's apprentice and a blacksmith's master. Perhaps this comparison was not accurate, but there was indeed a huge difference, just like the difference between a lower realm and a higher realm. Under the mysterious control of the spirit raining technique, the spirit raining weapon flew up and down. It was extremely agile, like a fish playing in the water, or an eagle soaring into the sky. Nimble, light, natural, and natural. The control went from simple to complicated. It was as if an embroidery master was controlling the embroidery needle in his hand to weave a beautiful and lifelike pattern. It was also as if a butterfly was flying and dancing among the flowers, dancing gracefully. Immediately, under Chen Zong's control, the spirit raining weapon performed a sword technique. The sword pierced out with extreme sharpness, as if it could pierce through the void. The indomitable sharpness of the sword surprised the Tiangong elder. Like a naive child who had received his favorite toy, Chen Zong loved it so much that he could not put it down. He kept using the spirit raining technique to control the spirit raining weapon. He kept using it, familiarizing himself with it, and developing its potential. The Tiangong elder did not disturb him. He just stood to the side and observed. This was his first time forging a spirit raining weapon, so he was very curious. Therefore, it would be beneficial for him to continue forging spirit raining weapons in the future. After all, the spirit raining weapon was a set of spirit raining weapons. The power of a single spirit raining weapon was limited. Chen Zong experimented for half a day before he stopped. He also felt that his control of the spirit raining weapon had reached its peak. However, Chen Zong also knew that the spirit raining weapon still had a lot of potential to be unearthed. It would take time and a lot of effort. Moreover, the spirit raining weapon was only a small part of a complete spirit raining weapon. A complete spirit raining weapon was a set. It was divided into 9 sets, and each set was divided into 9 blades. In this way, the 81 swords were the imperial god armament, and the black sword was only one part of the complete Imperial God armament. However, it was impossible for him to obtain a complete spirit-raining weapon here. This was because a soul-dissolving stone could only forge a part of the spirit-raining weapon. Next, Chen Zong, in addition to his previous cultivation, continued to unearth the potential of the second part of the spirit-raining technique. He continued to use it with the spirit-raining weapon. 3 days later, Chen Zong was controlling the two black blades. Sometimes they would move forward in a straight line. Other times they would move up and down, left and right. They were like two spiritual snakes. This was the second part of the spirit-raining weapon that the Tiangong Elder had used 3 days to forge. Day after day passed. Time flowed like water. The Tiangong Elder had forged more and more parts of the spirit-raining weapon. Chen Zong's divine sense was so strong that he could control multiple blades at the same time. However, Chen Zong also realized that if he did not use the spirit control technique, he could only control 9 swords at the same time. Moreover, there would be a kind of obscure feeling, and he would not be able to use them as he wished. If he wanted to control the 10th sword, there would be a great disturbance. However, when he used the spirit-raining technique to control the spirit-raining weapon, he could easily control 9 blades without any burden. In fact, Chen Zong could even control 18 blades at the same time. He only felt that it was a little strenuous. However, this strenuous feeling was gradually lessening as he continued to cultivate. Unfortunately, Chen Zong only had 2 soul-dissolving ores even though he had prepared plenty of materials, so he could only smith 18 swords at most. The spirit-raining technique's spirit-raining weapon was called a spirit-raining weapon. It was made up of 81 blades. 9 blades could form a lesser spirit-raining weapon. In other words, Chen Zong now had 2 lesser spirit-raining weapons at his disposal. Go! Chen Zong muttered to himself. Under the control of the spirit-raining technique, 18 pitch-black rays of light with a shocking sharpness instantly pierced through the sky. They shot forward at an astonishing speed, piercing through everything. It was as if they had turned the void into a sieve. It was extremely terrifying. Chen Zong was sure that even a 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage genius would find it difficult to resist such a sharp blade. However, it was still not powerful enough to deal with a Saint Rudiment stage master like Tian Jianzi. Combine! Chen Zong pointed his sword finger in a circle. The 18 black blades instantly lit up with a black glow. A mysterious connection was formed between them. It was as if there was a connection deep in their bloodline. In an instant, the 9 blades merged into one, transforming into 2 blades that were 10 times larger. The power they exuded was more than 10 times more terrifying. Kill! Under the control of Chen Zong, the 2 larger black blades and the lesser spirit-raining weapon instantly pierced through the air. Its power was even more shocking. It was as if it could cut through everything. The void seemed to be on the verge of collapsing in an instant. The 2 black sword lights continued to spread forward. It was as if they had penetrated the depths of the void. It took a long time for them to dissipate. Chen Zong was secretly shocked. The power of this attack was so strong. With Tian Jianzi's strength, even if he used all his strength, he would not be able to resist it. He would be defeated in an instant. In other words, the power of this attack was above his own line of heaven and earth. But at the same time, this attack consumed a lot of his divine consciousness and strength. Chen Zong estimated that he could only use such a powerful attack twice in an instant. However, this was also because his cultivation of the spirit-raining technique was not enough. If he continued to cultivate it, the more profound it became, the more powerful it would be, and the lower the consumption would be. Chen Zong was happy from the bottom of his heart that he had another means of attack. However, he did not have enough soul-dissolving stones. Otherwise, he could forge more lesser spirit-raining weapons. Little friend, since you have the heavenly extraordinary fire, I wonder if you are interested in the art of forging? The Tiangong elder suddenly asked. Why do you ask, senior? Chunzong was slightly surprised. This old man's forging technique is called the Heavenly Fire Void Refining Technique. You need to master the heavenly extraordinary fire to cultivate it, and you also need a strong divine consciousness. The Tiangong elder sighed. Although I can live for a long time, I don't know if I can leave this bewildering light sea in my lifetime. I also don't know when I will meet with misfortune. I don't want the Heavenly Fire Void Refining Technique to be lost. After half a year of getting along with you, this old man sees that you have an excellent temperament and talent. You are the best inheritor of the Heavenly Fire Void Refining Technique. Of course, this old man does not need you to be my disciple. I only need you to master the Heavenly Fire Void Refining Technique and pass it on. This old man guesses that you will not stay here with me forever. If you find more soul-dissolving stones in the future, you can forge your own lesser spirit-raining weapon with the Heavenly Fire Void Refining Technique and become a real lesser spirit-raining weapon. The Tiangong elder's last words moved Chunzong. Indeed, if he could master the Heavenly Fire Void Refining Technique, he could forge his own lesser spirit-raining weapon in the future. Thinking back, if he had mastered the Heavenly Fire Void Refining Technique, he would not have needed to find the Tianlingzi and would not have caused a series of unnecessary strong enemies and troubles. He would not have had to risk his life to enter the bewildering light sea, and he did not even know if he could get out. After thinking for a moment, Chunzong came to a conclusion. Since the Tiangong elder was willing to pass on the forging technique that he was so proud of to him, he had no reason to refuse. In that case, he would accept it. The Tiangong elder did not need Chunzong to be his disciple. He only needed to pass on this technique and not let it be severed. After all, it was the culmination of the Tiangong elder's thousands of years of painstaking effort. It was the essence of great success. Chapter 1665. The Heavenly Fire Void Refining Technique was the lifelong work of the Tiangong elder. What he wanted to pass on to Chunzong was not only the contents of the Heavenly Fire Void Refining Technique, but also the forging experience that he had accumulated over thousands of years. These experiences were incomparably precious. One was willing to impart without holding back, and the other was willing to learn. Working together, Chunzong quickly grasped the Heavenly Fire Void Refining Technique. Chunzong also discovered that the Heavenly Fire Void Refining Technique was of great help to the cultivation of the rare flames of heaven and earth. Its effects were even better than the ancient fire refining technique. Naturally, the Heavenly Fire Void Refining Technique replaced the ancient fire refining technique. Using the Heavenly Fire Void Refining Technique to control the purple ruin incineration flame, coupled with the various forging experiences and techniques imparted by the Tiangong elder, Chunzong continued to experiment. Fortunately, he had stored a lot of forging materials in his storage ring, so he could use them to practice. Chunzong's talent was astonishing, and his comprehension was superb. The Tiangong elder was amazed, and the more he imparted, the more motivated he became. Although the two were not related, they were master and disciple. Chunzong naturally respected the Tiangong elder very much. Time flowed by like water. During this period of time, Chunzong and the Elder of Heaven's craft stayed on the island and never left. Chunzong's level of blacksmithing was constantly improving. With his superb comprehension and learning ability, Chunzong was like a huge sponge in water, constantly absorbing water. Even if there were some things that he did not understand, he could remember them first and slowly learn them in the future. Finally, under the guidance of the Tiangong elder, he refined the components of the royal divine armament. Of course, because he did not have the soul-dissolving stone, what he refined was only an embryo. However, he could keep it for now, and when he found the soul-dissolving stone in the future, it would take shape and become a component of the royal divine armament. After refining all of the materials, he obtained a total of 2 sets of Royal Divine Armament embryos. Next, Chen Zong shifted his focus to cultivation. In the blink of an eye, Chen Zong had stayed on this island for almost 2 years. The Taichu sword energy technique was circulated at full force, and a shocking power swept through every part of his body, causing a wave of violent whistling sounds that were extremely shocking. A large amount of spiritual energy of heaven and earth gathered from all directions and surged into his body. It was purified by the purple blaze of devastation, and then refined and absorbed by Chen Zong. The primary heaven elixir exploded and turned into an astonishing amount of vigorous primary force that surged into Chen Zong's body. Absorb. Refine. His cultivation base had increased. His aura fluctuated and instantly became even stronger. Late 8th Heaven Saint Realm. His chi refinement cultivation had finally achieved another breakthrough. For Chen Zong, every time he made a breakthrough in his cultivation, even if it was just a small breakthrough, his strength would increase significantly. Not only had his chi refinement cultivation successfully broken through to the late 8th Heaven Saint rudiment stage, but his body refinement cultivation had also successfully broken through to the late 8th Heaven Chaos Heaven stage. His chi refinement cultivation and body refinement cultivation were finally on par. The cultivation of his Lingwu Supreme Technique minor divine ability was still at the initial stage, and there was still a long way to go before it reached the mastery stage. Chen Zong felt that another secret technique, the Blood Thunder Explosion, was also on the verge of a breakthrough, so he cultivated it with all his might. Breakthrough. Mastery. The power contained in the Blood Thunder seed of the Mastery Stage Blood Thunder Explosion was enough for him to use it 100 times. Senior, it's time for me to leave. Chen Zong found the Tiangong elder and directly stated his purpose of visit. The Tiangong elder fell silent. In fact, he could tell from the beginning that Chen Zong did not want to stay here for long and would leave at any time. He just did not expect it to be so soon. However, the Tiangong elder had actually tested Chen Zong's strength before. With the heavenly wonder fire, as long as he did not encounter sea beasts or fog devils, ordinary fog devils would not be able to do anything to him. As for sea beasts and fog devils, they were very strong. Even if he had the strength of a powerful half-step great saint, he dared not say that he could completely resist them. If he was not careful, he might be killed. I can see that you have made up your mind. In that case, I will not keep you. But remember, be careful. You must stay alive. In addition, the dangers in the bewildering light sea are not only fog devils, and sea beasts, but also other people, the Tiangong elder said seriously. He did not want Chen Zong to die in the bewildering light sea after he had just passed on the heavenly fire void refining technique. I will be careful, senior, Chen Zong said seriously, and immediately bowed to the Tiangong elder. Although they were not master and disciple, he had received the other's inheritance. These 3 salutes were natural, and the Tiangong elder accepted it calmly and contentedly. Senior, I'm leaving, Chen Zong said, and immediately turned around to use his body technique, quickly leaving the small island. After the Tiangong elder watched Chen Zong leave, he sighed slightly. From now on, he would be alone again. I'm old and I'm more afraid of being alone, the Tiangong elder sighed deeply. Fortunately, there was still wine. Chen Zong left all the wine. There were hundreds of jars. If he drank sparingly, he could still last for a long time. After nearly 2 years, Chen Zong once again stepped into the fog of the bewildering light sea. He chose a direction and continued to move forward. The improvement of his cultivation had made Chen Zong's strength more powerful. The cultivation of the divine control technique and the success of the divine control divine weapon had also strengthened Chen Zong's divine sense. Originally, the recovery speed could barely keep up with the consumption speed when it covered about a kilometer. Now that it could cover an area of 1,500 meters, The recovery speed could barely keep up with the consumption speed. The black blade instantly shot out. In the blink of an eye, it appeared 2,000 meters away, and kept flying forward at the same speed as Chen Zong. Within a radius of 100 meters with the black blade as the center, Chen Zong could also clearly sense it. This feeling was very strange. It was as if part of his consciousness was attached to the black blade. The black blade once again burst out with amazing speed, and in a flash, it appeared 3,000 meters away and stopped. Similarly, within a radius of 100 meters with the black blade as the center, Chen Zong could clearly sense it. 3,000 meters. This was 1,500 meters more than the coverage of divine sense, and the consumption of divine sense would not increase. In this environment, it was undoubtedly safer for him. Immediately after, the second black sword broke through the air and appeared 6,000 meters away, 3,000 meters away from the first black sword. With the divine control divine weapon and the divine control technique, Chen Zong could grasp the situation 6,000 meters away. With the black blade as the center, everything within a radius of 100 meters was very clear. However, now he could only use 2 black blades at the same time to extend the sensing distance. The maximum range was 6,000 meters, and the sensing range was 100 meters. The materials used to forge the divine control divine weapon were very precious. After being forged, it was very hard. Its hardness surpassed that of a 9th-grade divine weapon. Even a top expert of the half-step Great Saint level would find it difficult to destroy it. With the 2 black blades as the vanguard, Chen Zong's flying speed suddenly more than doubled. Fog Demon. Under the detection of the black blades, Chen Zong keenly sensed the existence of the Fog Demon. The Fog Demon also discovered the black blades and attacked. The Fog Blade was extremely sharp. It broke through the air and attacked, but it was blocked by the black blades in an instant. The Fog Blade's power was extraordinary, but it was more targeted at the spirit level. The Fog Demon had a little intelligence, but it was not very intelligent. Most of it was based on instinct. Unable to destroy the black blades with one attack, the Fog Demon paused for a moment, like a person in a daze. The black blades burst forth with terrifying sharpness in an instant. They counterattacked in an instant and directly tore the Fog Demon apart. However, the body of the Fog Demon was formed by countless fog. It did not have a physical body at all, and was extremely difficult to kill. It could either be continuously destroyed until it could not be reformed, or it could be attacked with the power of heaven and earth. It just so happened that Chen Zong had mastered the purple domain flames of destruction. After the black blades cut through the body of the Fog Demon, they burst forth with astonishing sword chi. The sword chi was like a storm, and the Fog Demon was instantly shredded into countless pieces. Boom! In an instant, the power of the purple domain flames of destruction burned on the blades. Another attack, like heavenly fire descending, directly bombarded the body of the Fog Demon that had just reformed, and immediately ignited it. In these 2 years, the purple domain flames of destruction was still at the 8th grade. However, when activated by the heavenly fire void refinement technique, it was better than the ancient fire refinement technique, and its power was more thoroughly stimulated. Supplemented by the heavenly fire Tao intent, its power greatly increased. Instantly, the Fog Demon was incinerated, and it was unable to escape like 2 years ago. The Fog Demon was burned into nothingness as it struggled, and only a crystal about the size of a soybean was left behind. Fog Crystal. It was beneficial for the comprehension of profound mysteries. However, this was clearly not a good time to comprehend it, so Chen Zong temporarily put the Fog Crystal into his storage ring. The black sword was the vanguard, and Chen Zong followed closely behind, constantly moving forward. The results of killing the Fog Demon this time were gratifying, and it was much easier than before. As expected, the forging of the Imperial Divine Armament had greatly improved his methods and strength. Chernzong didn't know how big the bewildering light ocean was, and neither did the Tiangong elder, who had stayed here for dozens of years. However, the Tiangong elder and Chernzong's choices were different. Dozens of years of continuous exploration and searching had already polished the Tiangong elder's ambition. After dozens of years, he had only finished exploring a radius of 50 kilometers in the center of the small island. Then, how many years would it take to finish exploring the vast, bewildering light ocean? A few hundred years? A few thousand years? Tens of thousands of years? Even though he had lived for thousands of years, the Tiangong elder didn't feel that a few hundred years was short. Thus, he stayed on the small island most of the time, and would only occasionally go out to hunt fog demons and obtain fog crystals to improve himself. He would only choose to leave when he was strong enough. Chernzong was different. Chernzong was still very young, and he had only entered the bewildering light ocean not long ago. He was hot-blooded and ambitious, and he had an urgent desire to leave this place. Thus, Chernzong chose to leave. If there was a day when he had enough power and could find a way to leave the bewildering light ocean, Chernzong would find the Tiangong elder and take him with him. Of course, that was under the condition that he had enough power. If he didn't, he could only give up for now. Chapter 1666. The fog was endless, and there were layers upon layers of dazzling light. A black sword light pierced through in a flash, followed by a second black sword light, and then a figure. Chernzong was still moving forward. With the gadget made by the Tiangong elder to calculate time, Chernzong knew that he had been away from the Tiangong elder's island for half a month. In this half a month, Chernzong had gone through 7 battles, and all of them were foggy beasts. The most he had encountered was 3 foggy beasts, but he had managed to kill them all in the end. In total, he had obtained 10 foggy crystals. However, he had not found a suitable place to stay, so he could test the effects of the foggy crystals. After flying for half a month, Chernzong did not know where he was. The only thing he was sure of was that he was far away from the Tiangong elder's island. Even if he wanted to go back, he could not find any way. However, Chernzong did not have any intention of going back. His heart was like a sword, and his mind was like a sharp blade, pressing forward with indomitable will. Even if the road ahead was long and dangerous, it could not dispel his indomitable faith and determination. Within the mist, a gray and fluttering light that was like a chaotic flowing light flashed past in the blink of an eye. Its speed was shockingly swift, and everywhere it passed, an extremely terrifying baleful aura and killing intent remained. The baleful aura and killing intent seemed to have come from the depths of hell, and it was extremely horrifying and caused all life to be extinguished. In the distance, Chernzong suddenly felt a strong wave of palpitations, as if some danger was approaching. Fast. Even faster. In an instant, Chernzong sped up. His perception had always been accurate and sharp. Since he felt danger approaching, there must be some danger coming. He could only burst out with an even faster speed to escape. However, even though he sped up, the feeling of danger did not lessen. On the contrary, it suddenly intensified. Immediately, a gray light broke through the air like lightning, and in an instant, Chernzong's scalp tingled. He felt as if his whole body was about to be torn into nothingness. His hair stood on end. He did not dare to hold back in the slightest and burst out with all his strength. In an instant, Chernzong's body turned into a slight gust of wind, but he was as fast as an aurora. Dodge. The gray light, which carried an endless murderous aura, brushed past him. The terrifying aura made Chernzong's heart beat faster and his scalp tingle. Just a little bit more, and he would have been hit. From the aura, Chernzong could feel that if he had been hit, his fate would have been terrible. Even if he did not die, he would have been seriously injured. Where did such a terrifying attack come from? Was it another cultivator who entered the bewildering light ocean? Or was it something else? The fog monster could be ruled out because Chen Zong already knew what the fog monster was capable of. Then, if it wasn't a fog demon or a cultivator, there was only one possibility. Fog demon. Based on the characteristics described by the Tiangong Elder, it seemed very possible. According to the Tiangong Elder, the fog demon was a ferocious existence that was many times more terrifying than the fog monster. Even with the strength of the Tiangong Elder, who could be ranked in the upper middle of the Shangyuan Great Saint list, he was still afraid of the fog demon. The fog demon was very strong and ferocious. It was very difficult to deal with. In the past few decades, the Tiangong Elder had encountered it 3 times. Once, he killed the fog demon. Once it was a tie. They could not defeat each other, so they could only give up and leave. Once, he escaped with his own strength and some secret treasures that he usually refined. This showed how terrifying the fog demon was. Chen Zong's strength was indeed much stronger than when he first entered the bewildering light ocean. Even if an ordinary expert of the half-step Great Saint level attacked, he might not be able to keep Chen Zong. However, the fog demon was a very terrifying existence. According to the Tiangong Elder, the weakest strength of the fog demon was stronger than an ordinary expert of the half-step Great Saint level. A gray figure with endless evil spirit and murderous intent locked onto Chen Zong from afar. The aura attacked, making Chen Zong feel like he was sinking into the 9 Serenities hell. Chen Zong was sure that if he was targeted, the consequences would be very bad. Run! Chen Zong broke out with all his speed. He did not care where he would end up. He just wanted to escape. However, the gray figure behind him was rapidly approaching. The extremely shocking evil spirit and murderous intent constantly attacked, rolling up a terrifying killing storm. The fog and dazzling light seemed to be shaken at this moment, almost breaking apart. Rampage! Unscrupulous! He ignored everything and annihilated everything. He saw it. Chen Zong saw a gray light with boundless baleful aura approaching him. The fog demon. Its whole body was gray like chaos, as if endless thick fog was flowing around it. It was about to turn into a solid flow of liquid. The gray liquid on its body was like a flood, and its whole body looked like an evil spirit coming out of the 9 Serenities hell. Just looking at it was enough to make many practitioners tremble with fear. Chen Zong was not intimidated by its appearance, but that extremely shocking baleful aura caused him to be extremely fearful. The Great Success Myriad Flow Force field rushed out in an instant, and the power of Lingwu burst out in an instant. The Deep Night Sword was raised high, and endless sword chi, sword light, and sword light filled the air. The surroundings became dim as if dusk had fallen. The sword slashed through the air, and the countless sword chi, sword light, and sword light merged into one in an instant, turning into a hair-like sword light that broke through the air and directly slashed the fog demon. The sword chi shattered in an instant, but the fog demon's body only paused for a moment. Gray light surged on its body, and the sword mark disappeared in an instant. The fog demon was like an enraged ferocious beast as it charged forward. The sword just now was the line of heaven and earth that he had used with 100% of his strength. So far, it was the ultimate move that was second only to the full-strength attack of the divine armament. However, it only left a sword mark on the opponent. It was also because of the power characteristics of the Genesis sword energy technique that even the Great Success Myriad Flow Force field seemed to be ineffective. This undoubtedly made Chen Zong even more afraid. He was no match for it. He was no match for it at all. If it were another place, Chen Zong might have used all his strength, or even let Chen Xiu appear to fight, to test his strength, and use the pressure of the opponent to stimulate his own potential and go further. However, this was the sea of bewildering light, which was not good for him. When practicing the sword, the sharpness could not be broken, but it did not mean that one had to put oneself to death. Only when there was no other choice would one have to put oneself to death and fight to live. With all his speed, Chen Zong quickly flew forward, but the fog demon was in hot pursuit. Once targeted by the fog demon, it would not give up at all. It would chase until the end, unless it was killed, or its speed was far superior to the opponent's. However, Chen Zong found that his speed was very fast, but the fog demon was faster, and it was not only closing in. Divine armament! Suddenly, 9 black sword edges appeared, and in an instant, they combined into the divine armament, turning into a long sword edge that was as wide as a palm, and appeared under Chen Zong's feet. His speed more than doubled. Chen Zong flew forward at an even faster speed, and suddenly widened the distance between him and the fog demon, which was constantly shortening. The fog demon seemed to be enraged, and it let out an incomparably mournful roar, like the roar of an evil spirit from the 9 serenities of hell. Its momentum was astonishing and extremely fierce. It was enraged. Compared to the fog demon seemed to have more spiritual intelligence, but it also had more of a bestial nature, and it was easily angered, like an extremely grumpy person. This was what it meant to be as fast as lightning. Chen Zong experienced that with the divine armament, his speed had doubled. Originally, Chen Zong's speed was close to the top of the Saint Rudiment stage, and it was vaguely comparable to an ordinary half-step Great Saint stage powerhouse. Now, with the power of the divine armament, his speed had doubled, and he was not inferior to an ordinary half-step Great Saint stage powerhouse. The irritable and angry fog demon's eyes shot out a rich red light, and there seemed to be gray flames burning around its body. The flames seemed to be dyed with traces of blood red, and its speed also increased in an instant, once again surpassing Chen Zong, and it continued to close in. The power of Lingwu burst out. In the blink of an eye, Chen Zong's strength reached the late 9th Heaven Saint stage, and his speed increased again. However, it took time to accumulate the power of Lingwu, so Chen Zong generally did not use it easily. After all, it was difficult to find a safe place to rest in this bewildering light sea. Therefore, the power of Lingwu was limited, and once it was used up, it was difficult to replenish it. On the other hand, the power of Lingwu could increase one's strength in a short time, and it could only be used at a critical moment. With the eruption of the power of Lingwu, Chen Zong's speed doubled again, and he once again shook off the fog demon. The gray flames on the fog demon's body burned more fiercely, and its speed increased again, constantly chasing after him. I can only use this secret treasure. Chen Zong was helpless. It was difficult to shake off the fog demon with his own strength. The secret treasure was given to Chen Zong by the Tiangong elder for escaping. It could be used in an instant to double Chen Zong's speed. Even a half-step Great Saint stage powerhouse's speed would be doubled in an instant. The power contained in each secret treasure was enough for a half-step Great Saint stage powerhouse to use for 60 breath. If a half-step Great Saint stage powerhouse's speed was doubled in 60 breaths, it was enough for him to fly far away. Chen Zong was only at the late 8th Heaven Saint stage, and there was a clear gap in strength between him and a half-step Great Saint stage powerhouse. Therefore, the secret treasure's power could last longer. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, Chen Zong continued to fly forward. His speed was so amazing that Chen Zong was mesmerized. The fog demon was furious, but it could no longer catch up with Chen Zong. Instead, it was left behind by Chen Zong. When the secret treasure's power was exhausted, Chen Zong's speed dropped again. At this moment, he had already left the fog demon far behind, and he did not know where it was. However, Chen Zong still had a lingering feeling that the fog demon could catch up with him at any time. Under the extreme speed just now, Chen Zong felt that he had a deeper understanding of speed. If he could go into seclusion for a while, he might be able to comprehend the sky-wind formless body technique to perfection. Unfortunately, he could not find a suitable place to comprehend it for the time being. A faint sense of crisis made him feel like there was a knife on his back, and he did not dare to stop. After taking pills to recover his consumed strength, Chen Zong maintained his high speed and continued to fly forward. Where was the front? Chapter 1667. Kill! The purple world incineration fire swept out. Suddenly, the fog demon was set ablaze. In less than 10 breaths, it turned into nothingness, leaving only a fog crystal. Chen Zong put away the fog crystal and quickly moved forward without stopping. Fortunately, he only encountered a fog demon once. The rest were all fog demons. Through the treasure given by the Tiangong elder, Chen Zong knew that it had been nearly half a year since he left the Tiangong elder's island. In the past 6 months, Chen Zong had been constantly moving forward in the fog and dazzling light. He didn't know how many tens of thousands of miles he had traveled. In fact, according to his speed, it was enough to cross the bewildering light sea. However, the bewildering light sea was like a huge natural maze. He felt that he was moving forward in a straight line, but in fact, he had unconsciously deviated from the direction. He didn't know where he was going after going around in circles. "Oh, I didn't expect to see a newcomer." A seemingly joking voice suddenly sounded. It was a bit frivolous, but it also seemed to have a kind of madness. It suddenly made Chen Zong's hair stand on end. A sense of crisis exploded in the depths of his heart, as if he had encountered a fog demon. Almost at the same time as the sound rang out, Chen Zong executed the formless heavenly wind movement technique to the extreme. He only felt an extremely sharp ray of light carrying an extreme killing intent fly past his original position, shattering the afterimage. Chen Zong instantly determined that it was a cultivator who attacked him. Moreover, the cultivator was very strong. It was a half-step great saint expert. As for why he attacked him, did he need to find a reason? Staying in the bewildering light sea for a long time, he faced all kinds of dangers every day. He couldn't leave for 10 years, 100 years, or even 1,000 years. When he opened his eyes, he would see layers of fog and endless dazzling light. No one could stand it. Even if he had a strong will, there would be times when he would go crazy or even go crazy. His temperament would change greatly, and his temperament would be distorted. After Chen Zong avoided the attack, he didn't hesitate to move forward and never looked back. That was because the might of that attack had caused him to feel his heart palpitate. It was enough to show that the other party was very, very strong. It was not something that he could contend against right now. A mere Saint Realm ant was actually able to avoid my blow. How interesting! The mocking voice, filled with a cold sneer, once again entered Chen Zong's ears. Extremely fierce, killing intent pressed down, causing Chen Zong to shudder with fear. That feeling of terror surged out from the depths of his body. Without hesitation, Chen Zong unleashed the remaining power of Lingwu, causing his speed to increase dramatically. Immediately after, he used the Royal Spirit Exalted technique and summoned the Lesser Royal Divine Weapon, causing his speed to increase again. However, that extremely sharp killing intent followed closely behind him like a maggot in a tarsal bone. It did not fall behind in the slightest and instead sped up along with his speed. Not bad, not bad. A mere 8th Heaven Saint Realm Mastery stage can actually unleash the speed of a 3-star half-step Great Saint. It really surprises me. It seems that you must have some big secrets on you. That icy cold voice that carried a mocking tone once again entered Chen Zong's ears, and it contained an indescribable coldness and ruthlessness that caused one's hair to stand on end. It was like a perverted executioner who liked to torture people to death slowly in order to seek pleasure. Chen Zong's sense of crisis was extremely strong. He had no choice but to take out the secret treasure that could increase his speed. The Tiangong elder had given him a total of 3 secret treasures. It was not that he didn't want to give him more, but it was not easy to refine such a secret treasure. The materials required were quite unusual, so there was a limited supply. The Tiangong elder didn't have much left. However, Chunzong had inherited the heavenly fire void refining technique and the Tiangong elders' thousands of years of refining experience. If he had the right materials, he could try to refine it. Right now, the most important thing was to escape. He had to escape from this powerhouse who was trying to kill him. The power of the secret treasure was activated. It immediately formed a silver light that shrouded his body. Energy continuously flowed into his body as if a powerful force had been injected into him. It directly increased his speed again. Oh, a secret treasure that increases speed. It seems like a little ant like you has a lot of good stuff on you. The mocking voice sounded again. You actually have the speed of a 4-star half-step great saint. Chunzong was even more shocked. Previously, he had managed to shake off the fog devil with such speed. However, this time, he was being pursued closely by the other party. Genius, no, you're a peerless genius, a top peerless genius. You've already passed the king naming pagoda, right? With your ability, you can at least detonate the 8-colored heavenly flower. I like peerless geniuses like you the most. The last few words carried an indescribable, addictive pleasure. It immediately made Chunzong's hair stand on end. He couldn't help but tremble. Goosebumps appeared all over his body, and a chill ran down his spine. This is a freak. If I fall into his hands, I won't have a good ending. Chunzong was very sure of this feeling. However, he was already at his fastest speed. The power of the secret treasure couldn't be maintained for too long. However, as long as there was a glimmer of hope, Chunzong wouldn't give up. That person followed Chunzong closely like a maggot in a tarsal bone, but he didn't attack immediately. Instead, he seemed to be observing Chunzong as if he was observing a prey. He was thinking about how to toy with this prey. It wasn't easy to see such a top peerless genius, especially when he had been trapped here for thousands of years. This would be a very good toy. And now, it was time for him to kill time. After a while, when the other party had used all his tricks, he would capture him alive and bring him back. He would slowly torture and play with him to relieve himself of the loneliness he had felt all these years. He only hoped that he could last a few more years. Otherwise, it wouldn't be easy to meet a newcomer. The last time was 20 years ago. The power of the secret treasure was exhausted, but Chunzong didn't take out a third secret treasure. This was because even if he used the secret treasure to increase his speed, the other party could still follow him closely. Moreover, he seemed to be very relaxed. He was completely playing with him. In that case, it didn't matter whether he used the secret treasure to increase his speed or not. Chunzong stopped the power of the Lingwu and his speed decreased again. Immediately, the lesser royal divine weapon automatically left his feet and circled around his body. Chunzong's speed decreased again and again. He even stopped. Oh, you've given up? The mocking voice sounded again with a hint of dissatisfaction. Is this the limit of the little ant? If that's the case, then it's not fun at all. If I don't think it's fun, the consequences will be very serious. The last 6 words were like a ghastly wind that blew out from hell, and it was suffused with extremely shocking coldness and killing intent. It seemed to have rendered the surrounding mist and dazzling light into a dark purgatory, and it caused Chunzong to almost suffocate. Too strong. This feeling was even stronger than that of the Tiangong elder. He was really unlucky this time to encounter such a tyrannical cultivator. Moreover, he was a perverted cultivator with a twisted mind. His thoughts were as fast as lightning. Chunzong thought of various feasible solutions. However, there was no solution. Just like that day in Miguang City, when he faced many powerhouses on the Great Saint ranking, the difference in strength was too great. He was no match for them at all. There was no solution. Only if he was strong enough could he hope to get out of this predicament. Unfortunately, his strength was very strong compared to a Saint Realm expert. However, it was still not enough for a half-step great saint. While Chunzong was thinking, a fog spread in front of him. Immediately, it condensed into a figure. The figure was dressed in a blood-red robe. His hands were behind his back. His long hair fluttered in the wind. His eyes were narrow and sharp. There was a scar at the corner of his eye that was as sharp as a knife. His pupils were blood-red, and his face was filled with madness. When that pair of eyes stared at him, Chern Zong's body involuntarily trembled. This trembling was not out of fear or dread, but an instinctive reaction from his body, a reaction that originated from the deepest part of his body. It was terrifying. That gaze was like a blood-red butcher's knife. When it fell on his body, it was as if it was a knife that was cutting through his skin, muscles, tendons, and bones. He felt as if his body was slowly being cut open, sliced, and dismembered. Without hesitation, Chern Zong exploded with his strongest attack. Lesser Divine Imperial Armament. The 1-meter-long black sword burst out with endless black light in an instant. It was extremely bright. Chern Zong poured all of his strength into it. Even his soul power erupted in an instant without holding back. Chern Zong did not know if his attack could cause damage to his opponent, but there was no other way. After this attack, it was time for Chen Xiu to make his move. After more than 2 years, Chen Xiu's cultivation had reached the peak of the 9th level Saint Realm. He was about to reach his limit. His strength had also increased a lot. If he fully activated the evil eye of obliteration, he might be able to hurt his opponent. As for whether or not he could kill his opponent, Chern Zong did not know. However, he could only take the risk. There was no way out. This was the only way. He had to fight to live. The sword attack was like a bolt of black divine thunder that tore through the void. It carried Chern Zong's full strength and unparalleled faith. Kill. The man in the blood-red robe was slightly stunned. He did not expect that a little ant would dare to take the initiative to attack him. Immediately, his expression changed slightly. He was a little surprised because he could feel that the attack was very powerful. If he only had a 1-star battle prowess, it would be difficult for him to withstand this attack. He might even be seriously injured or even killed. In fact, this sword was enough to threaten a half-step great saint with a 2-star battle prowess. Unfortunately, he was not 1-star, 2-star, or 3-star. He was far stronger. The power of this attack was indeed very strong, very mysterious and brilliant, but so what? In the face of absolute strength, everything was in vain. Instead of dodging, he simply extended a hand from behind his back. With a light wave of his wide, blood-red sleeve, it was as if he was swatting away a speck of dust. However, in that instant, an extremely shocking might burst forth. Chapter 1668. The mist and dazzling light seemed to freeze in an instant. Chern Zong's eyes widened, but his pupils contracted in an instant. He had thought that it would be difficult to kill his opponent with a blow from the divine armament, and even difficult to injure his opponent. However, he did not expect that this blow would be blocked in such a way. A single finger, a pale and bloodless slender finger, easily blocked the violent attack of the divine armament. It was unable to move at all. Looking at its posture, it seemed to be extremely relaxed. Shocking. Chern Zong could only feel shock. It turned out that the gap between him and a powerful half-step great saint expert was so obvious. It was as if there was a natural chasm between them, and there was no comparison at all. However, the blood-robed man was also surprised, because he could feel that the power of the sword was nothing compared to him, but there was something strange about it. There was a kind of extreme sharpness that wanted to cut through his defense, tear his strength, and hit his finger. Fortunately, the power was not strong enough, and only a part of his strength was torn. The opponent's finger gently shook and flicked, and the divine armament flew backward in an instant, as if it had been hit by an ancient giant beast. It turned into a stream of black lightning and rushed toward Chern Zong at an astonishing speed, as if it wanted to pierce through Chern Zong and smash him into pieces. Chern Zong mobilized all his divine thoughts, and the divine armament was pushed to the extreme. Blue veins bulged on his forehead, and he barely managed to control the divine armament. The instantaneous burst of power made Chernzong feel like he was about to collapse. As for the Azura doppelganger Chernzong, he did not use it. Such a powerful sword strike had been easily blocked by a single finger. That gentle flick of the finger had forced him to unleash all of his divine sense in order to block it. The gap was too big. Even if Chern Xiu used all his strength to display the evil eye of obliteration, he could not do anything to the opponent unless the power of the evil sword of obliteration was still there. In that case, if he used the Azura doppelganger, the consequences would be even worse. With a thought, Chernzong did not hesitate to dive down. Below was the sea, and there were terrifying sea monsters in the sea. However, at this moment, Chernzong did not care so much. Diving into the sea might be a way to survive. Take a gamble. Fighting for a way out depended on one's luck and ability. The blood-red-robed man was quite surprised. He had never thought that Zhao Fu would still be thinking about escaping. He was indeed quite tenacious, and this was even better. He would be able to play around for a few more years, and he would not die so easily. With a casual point of his finger, a beam of blood-red light shot out at an extremely fast speed, much faster than Chernzong's. It hit Chernzong directly. He couldn't let this prey escape into the water. Otherwise, the sea beasts in the water would be very dangerous. Even he didn't dare to enter the water so easily. The power contained in this finger was very ingenious. It directly hit Chernzong and sent him flying, causing Chernzong's entire body to tremble as if he had been struck by lightning. He couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood, and his muscles and bones felt as if they had fallen apart. His entire body was sore, and it was difficult for him to muster any strength. His entire body turned around and flew backward, unable to fall into the water. With a tremble of his finger, a second beam of finger strength shot out and hit Chernzong again. The finger strength was shot out from his finger, but it hit Chernzong's body like a hammer, causing him to tremble all over again. Finger after finger, each finger attack caused Chernzong's body to tremble once, and he spat out a mouthful of blood as he was sent flying. With the strength of this blood-robed man, he could actually kill Chernzong in a flash, but he didn't do so. Instead, he treated Chernzong like a prey, like a cat playing with a mouse. He didn't kill Chernzong immediately, but kept teasing him until he didn't want to play anymore. Chernzong's body refining cultivation was not weak, and his body was strong. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to withstand his opponent's attacks again and again. Of course, this was also because his opponent didn't intend to kill Chernzong. Endure. As Chernzong withstood his opponent's attacks, he took out pills to heal himself while enduring and waiting for an opportunity. Chernzong stuffed a large number of pills into his mouth, but the blood-robed man didn't stop him at all. On the contrary, the teasing in his eyes became more obvious. This is fun. I haven't played like this for many years. Now I'll have a good time. When I'm done, I'll bring him back and slowly torture him to relieve myself of the endless loneliness and pressure in the bewildering light ocean. While being attacked, Chernzong cultivated the non-quenching jade technique with all his might to refine the pills and use the pressure from his opponent to improve himself as much as possible. Even though Chernzong knew that he wouldn't be his opponent's match even if his cultivation improved a little, the higher his cultivation, the stronger his strength. When the time came, it would be more possible for him to escape. As long as there was a slight chance, Chernzong would seize it and never give up. After being attacked for the 18th time, Chernzong's body trembled, and suddenly, a tyrannical aura erupted and soared into the sky. His body-refining cultivation had broken through. Peak of the 8th level chaotic heaven realm. He actually broke through. The blood-robed man was slightly surprised. He was actually able to break through under his attacks. It was really enviable. Jealousy flashed in the blood-robed man's eyes like a burning flame. He hated this kind of peerless prodigy the most. Then, he would add more strength to his next attack. With that thought, the blood-robed man attacked again and pointed his finger. Judging from his expression, he seemed to be a little more serious. The power of his finger also increased a little and became more powerful. There was no way to dodge. A hint of determination flashed in Chen Zong's eyes. The remaining Lingwu power erupted again and increased his body refining strength. Unbreakable golden body. This time, he must block it. The force of his finger pierced through the air and hit Chen Zong's body. It sounded like a drum being beaten, and it made an astonishing sound. The rumble shook the air and rippled like layers of water. He blocked it. The unbreakable golden body, after the eruption of Lingwu power, had surpassed the level of a saint rudiment stage and reached the level of a half-step great saint. It blocked his opponent's finger attack. Moreover, Chen Zong borrowed the force of this attack and instantly used his movement technique to rush downward. He was extremely fast. The blood-robed man was stunned again. His strengthened finger attack was blocked. "You little ant. You really surprised me." A dense smile hung from the corner of the blood-robed man's mouth. Immediately, his finger turned into a palm as he grabbed and pressed towards Chen Zong. Chen Zong's rapidly falling body was grabbed by an invisible force, causing him to suddenly come to a halt. After which, he swiftly flew towards the blood-robed man. There was no resistance at all. Soon after, as the man in blood-red robes pressed down with his hand, an extremely terrifying force erupted like a torrent, directly smashing into Chen Zong's body. The terrifying force invaded his body, destroying all his power to resist. Immediately, the force within Chen Zong's body collapsed. All his resistance was destroyed. With a flash, the blood-robed man quickly flew forward. His hand was like a claw that could lift the sky as he grabbed at Chen Zong. Chen Zong could not help but feel his heart sink and despair enveloped him. That attack had scattered the power in his body, and it was difficult for him to gather and mobilize it. If he was caught by his opponent, there might be no hope for him to escape. Spirit control technique. The power of his divine sense was still there and had not been scattered. The divine armament immediately took Chen Zong and quickly moved to the side. He still had the power to resist. The blood-robed man was surprised and even happier. This claw was so mysterious that it seemed to cover the sky and the sun. No matter how Chen Zong tried to dodge, he could not avoid it. It was as if all his reactions were under the control of this palm. The claw came from the sky like a claw of heaven, directly enveloping him like a haze. Danger. Extreme danger. He could only expose the Azura doppelganger. After that, he would be completely out of control. The level of a half-step great saint was not something he could fight against at present. In the blink of an eye, a wisp of silver blade light suddenly tore through the sky, and it carried extreme sharpness, mighty power, and a shocking might that could sweep through the heavens and the earth as it instantly slashed down towards Qin Shi. The saber light arrived and directly cut off the blood-robed man's claw. Chen Zong only felt his body lighten. He immediately controlled the divine armament with the spirit control technique and quickly retreated with him. The saber light mercilessly slashed toward the blood-robed man, as if to split him in two. The blood-robed man's face became gloomy and his eyes became cold. There seemed to be flames of anger burning in his eyes. The claw became blazing. The blood-red light tore through the sky like a ray of light and grabbed at the silver saber light in an instant. "Go forward and enter the bewildering light island." A deep voice with a bit of fierceness came into Chen Zong's ears. There was a hint of urgency in it. Chen Zong did not know who the attacker was, but this was his current escape route. He sped up and used the secret treasure that increased his speed again. It was also the last secret treasure, which caused his speed to soar. Chen Zong was like a stream of light, constantly flying forward. Fast. Extremely fast. He kept moving forward, looking for the so-called bewildering light island. Perhaps that was where his chance of survival lay. Behind him, an astonishing saber essence soared into the sky, accompanied by an even more terrifying aura. The aura was suffused with blood-red light, as if the 9 serenities hell had descended. It was awe-inspiring and terrifying. Even though he was far away, Chen Zong could not help but tremble in shock. Was that the strength of the blood-robed man? It was indeed very terrifying. He was no match for him at all. There was no comparison. Go. Chen Zong continued to move forward, and he could vaguely see a huge silhouette. The outline, like the dawn, directly struck Chen Zong's heart, making Chen Zong feel happy. An island. It was an island, a very huge island. It was more than 10,000 times bigger than the island where the Tiangong elder lived. Advance to the island. Go, go, go. As if he saw light and hope, Chen Zong kept moving forward, getting closer and closer to the island. Traces of vigorous aura diffused from the island, as if suppressing all directions. It felt as if the island was suppressing the bewildering light sea. Chen Zong did not know why he had such a feeling. The edge of the huge island was covered with a transparent shield, like a layer of film. Chen Zong's body approached, and the moment he touched the shield, he quickly merged into it, like a drop of water merging into the sea. There was a strange feeling of passing through time and space, spreading all over his body, penetrating into the depths of his flesh and soul. It was very strange. Immediately, Chen Zong's body descended, and his feet touched the ground. He felt that the air here was very fresh, as if he had entered some kind of holy land. Indeed, compared to the outside world, the light here was bright, without the interference of fog and endless dazzling light. The vision was better, and the sky and earth seemed to have been cleansed. Chapter 1669. Fresh, clear, bright and clear. This was a feeling that he hadn't felt for a long time. It was a feeling that made him feel incomparably nostalgic. It was a feeling that made Chen Zongyao deeply intoxicated. In the bewildering light sea, there were layers of fog and endless dazzling light. Vision was greatly disturbed, like a kind of pollution that affected one's body all the time. After a long time, it would make one feel irritated. Chen Zong had been in the bewildering light sea for more than 2 years. He had been in such an environment all the time and had almost forgotten what the outside world was like. Now that he had entered this huge island, he once again felt fresh and clear. There was an indescribable feeling in his heart. It was like a person who was about to die of thirst in a dry desert suddenly finding a clear and sweet spring water. Chen Zong breathed greedily. He felt that in the past 2 years, he had been constantly shuttling in the heavy fog of the bewildering light sea. It seemed that a large amount of turbid air had accumulated in his body. At this moment, as he breathed, the turbid air was constantly expelled. His body seemed to have been reborn and was so light that he could almost fly. Of course, this was an illusion. Even if he stayed in the fog of the bewildering light sea for 10 or 100 years, his body would not be polluted and filled with turbid air. It was just that the sudden change from a turbid environment to a fresh one, the strong contrast would give rise to such a feeling in one's body and mind. The chi of heaven and earth here was naturally much purer and richer than in the bewildering light sea. It was completely comparable to the outside world. While he seemed to be intoxicated, Chen Zong did not really indulge in it. Instead, he was very vigilant about his surroundings. The power of divine sense spread out and suddenly found that the restrictions on divine sense here seemed to be relaxed. It was similar to the outside world. His divine sense could completely cover a range of tens of thousands of meters. His heart domain also covered a range of 2,000 meters. In this way, even if a powerful half-step great saint expert appeared, he would be able to sense it immediately. Chen Zong's eyes flashed with a trace of light and swept across. In just an instant, he saw everything in front of him clearly. This was indeed a huge island, and it was not at all dazzling. In front of him was a forest that stretched for an unknown distance. Even with Chen Zong's superhuman eyesight, he could not see through it. With a move, Chen Zong immediately flew at a low altitude and headed forward. He didn't know how the battle between the owner of the silver saber light and the man in the blood-red robe was, but the aura that erupted from both of them was extremely tyrannical, far superior to his own. Even if he intervened, it would be futile. If the owner of the silver saber light dared to attack, he would not be much weaker than the blood-robed man. He should not be in any danger. Furthermore, the other party had hinted for him to enter Bewildering Light Island, which should be the island. The other party would also enter this island, and at that time they would meet again, and he would express his gratitude to the other party. On the other hand, Chen Zong also had a deep concern about whether the other party would harm him. Since more than 2 years ago, Chen Zong had been hunted down. Everything went wrong, which made Chen Zong even more vigilant. At this moment, a silver saber light broke through the air from outside. It was as swift as a silver lightning, and immediately chased after Chen Zong. The astonishing aura made Chen Zong's expression change. He looked back and saw the silver saber light. With a flash of the saber light, a gray-robed figure appeared in front of Chen Zong. It was a tall and strong middle-aged man with broad shoulders that seemed to be able to carry a mountain. He had a square face, resolute eyes, and a large silver saber on his back. As he stood in the void, he gave off a feeling of being able to support both heaven and earth. At first glance, Chen Zong felt that this person was not a treacherous person. "Senior, thank you for saving me just now." Chen Zong respectfully saluted to show his gratitude. In any case, it was the other party who saved him. Otherwise, he would have fallen into the hands of the blood-robed man, and would not have had a good end. "Don't worry about it. It was just a coincidence." The man with the silver saber laughed heartily. "But you were unlucky to meet Luoyen." Chen Zong knew that the blood-robed man was called Luoyen. "Senior, what's so special about this island?" Chen Zong memorized the name of the blood-robed man and planned to ask about it later. He was not the kind of person who would laugh after being bullied. It was only because of the gap in strength that he could not settle his grudges. However, that day would come. Understanding the other party in advance would help him settle his grudges in the future. But before that, he needed to have a more intuitive understanding of the place where he was. This island is called Bewildering Light Island. The middle-aged man with the silver saber smiled. "It is the center of the Bewildering Light Ocean." "The center?" Chen Zong was slightly stunned. "Yes, Bewildering Light Island is the center of the Bewildering Light Ocean." The middle-aged man with the silver saber affirmed again. "Can we leave?" Chen Zong's eyes lit up and he quickly asked. This was the question he was most concerned about. The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "I have been in the Bewildering Light Ocean for more than 100 years. I came to Bewildering Light Island more than 60 years ago, and I still haven't found the way out." When Chen Zong heard this, he couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. "But..." The middle-aged man with the silver saber paused for a moment, and then he said again, "It is said that as long as one can pass the Bewildering Light Realms test, there is hope to leave. But as far as I know, no one has been able to leave in the past 10,000 years." Chen Zong was attracted by the Bewildering Light Realm in the middle-aged man's words. "Senior, may I ask what's so special about the Bewildering Light Realm?" Chen Zong asked neither slowly nor quickly. "Since you have entered Bewildering Light Island, I will tell you some things about Bewildering Light Island in detail." The middle-aged man with the silver saber smiled, and then he explained to Chen Zong in detail. Bewildering Light Island was the center of the Bewildering Light Ocean. This was a saying, but whether it was true or not, no one dared to be 100% sure. It was just that everyone thought so since ancient times. Since everyone thought so, then so be it. As for whether it was the center or not, it was actually not a particularly important matter, and no one would specially look into it. Everyone who has just entered Bewildering Light Island is considered a newcomer, and has a protection period of 10 years. The middle-aged man with the silver saber said. Chernzong was now considered a newcomer, and had a protection period of 10 years. In other words, no one could attack Chernzong within 10 years. Otherwise, they would violate the rules, and would be killed on the spot by the power of Bewildering Light Island. It was said that there was once a powerful expert of half-step Great Sage realm who relied on his formidable strength to not pay attention to this rule, and forcibly attacked a newcomer. The consequence was that he was instantly struck by an extremely frightening thunderbolt, and turned into powder, and completely disappeared. Luo Yin has stayed here for a very long time. It should be several hundred years or nearly 1,000 years. Originally, he was a bloodthirsty person. He had stayed here for a long time, and didn't have any hope of leaving. So, his temperament became even more twisted, and he likes to torture others for fun. Although I attacked this time, he certainly has his eyes on you, and he has the fighting strength of a 6-star expert. The middle-aged man with the silver saber said solemnly, So, it's best for you to improve your strength as much as possible in these 10 years. However, my suggestion is to find a chance to leave this place. If you're willing to leave, I can send you on your way. In other words, he was not optimistic about Chernzong's chances. After all, Chernzong's cultivation was only at the 8th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage, while Luo Yin had the fighting strength of a 6-star expert. The gap between the two of them was difficult to calculate. The middle-aged man with the silver saber thought it would be good if Chernzong could cultivate to the limit of the 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage in 10 years. Compared to Luo Yin, who had the fighting strength of a 6-star expert, there was still an insurmountable gap. Let alone 10 years, even if it was 100 years, it would still be the same. Therefore, the best way was to find a chance to leave. Senior, I'll stay and take a look first. Chernzong said with a smile. Isn't there a protection period of 10 years? Chernzong was very interested in the bewildering light realm. If he could find a way to leave this place, he naturally did not want to miss it. Moreover, Chernzong firmly believed that his strength would improve greatly in 10 years. At that time, even if he could not defeat Luo Yin, he would still be able to defend himself. Coupled with the environment of the bewildering light ocean, it was not impossible for him to escape. Of course, he could not explain his confidence to the middle-aged man. All right. The middle-aged man with the silver saber nodded. There were still 10 years left. If you want to leave in 10 years, you can let me know. I can send you on your way. Thank you, Senior, Chernzong said. After the 10 years of newcomer protection period, if you want to continue staying on Bewildering Light Island, you must pay a fog source or beast source. The fog source is the item obtained from killing the fog devil. The beast source is the item obtained from killing sea beasts. According to the grade of the fog source and beast source, the time you can continue staying on Bewildering Light Island is different. The minimum is 10 years and the maximum is 100 years. The middle-aged man with the silver saber said. After the first 10 years, one would not receive the protection of Bewildering Light Island. If one wanted to continue staying on Bewildering Light Island, then one must pay a fog source or beast source. What was the purpose of staying on Bewildering Light Island? Firstly, it was safe. There was a relatively safe place to stay and cultivate. Secondly, one could challenge the bewildering light realm. However, it was very dangerous to hunt the fog devil or sea beast. If one encountered a weak fog devil, it would not be a big deal. If one encountered a strong fog devil, it was possible that one would die. However, if one continued to stay in the bewildering light island without a place to rest or recuperate, it would be even more dangerous. The middle-aged man with the silver saber had stayed in Bewildering Light Ocean for a much longer time than the Tiangong elder. Moreover, his understanding of Bewildering Light Ocean was not something the Tiangong elder could compare with. Chen Zong learned more information from the middle-aged man with the silver saber. For example, the middle-aged man's name was Zhao Mingkong. He also had the title of Silver Saber King. For example, the division of strength between the Fog Devil and the Sea Beast. For example, the division of strength between the Half-Step Great Saint. For example, the number of people on Bewildering Light Island and their strength, etc. According to the Silver Saber King, Zhao Mingkong, there were about 100 people on Bewildering Light Island. Some of them could not return after leaving to hunt the Fog Devil and Sea Beasts. Some were killed on the island because of some conflict. Zhao Mingkong introduced the island to Chen Zong as he led the way for Chen Zong. Their destination was naturally Zhao Mingkong's residence on the Silver Light Saber. Chapter 1670. I'm really sorry. I promised to update at 9, but something came up, so it was delayed until now. The strength of Half-Step Great Saint was directly divided into 1 star to 9 star. 1 star was naturally the weakest, and the most common Half-Step Great Saint was 1 star. The difference between each star level was very obvious. It was at least 1 time or even 2 times. As for the level above 9 star, there was another name, which was 10 star, also known as Invincible Half-Step Great Sage. However, there were very few people who could reach the 9 star level. As for the Invincible 10 star level, it was even rarer. In fact, there was another saying: if one wanted to break through to the Great Saint realm and become the strongest, one must first have 7 star battle strength to have hope. The higher the battle strength, the greater the hope. 7 star battle strength could only have a little hope. In other words, every Great Saint realm's strongest had at least 7 star battle strength when they were Half-Step Great Saint. Luo Yan with 6 star battle strength was already so strong. 7 star battle strength would at least be doubled. How terrifying would that be? Chen Zong couldn't imagine. However, Silver Blade King Zhao Mingkong could resist Luo Yan. His battle strength should also be 6 star level. Chen Zong didn't ask about this. According to Zhao Mingkong, among the 100 or so people on the Bewildering Light Island, the one with the highest combat power was at the 7 star level. There were a total of 3 of them, and the most powerful one was very close to the 8 star level. The other 2 were slightly weaker, but they were still at the 7 star level and were very strong. As for 6 star people, there were about 10 of them. Luo Yan was among the best, and the rest were 5 star and 4 star battle strength. In other words, the lowest battle strength on Bewildering Light Island was 4 star. As for those below 4 star, unless they were very lucky, it was very difficult to reach Bewildering Light Island. After all, it was in the center of Bewildering Light Ocean. Moreover, 1 star, 2 star, and 3 star battle strength had to hand over the fog source or beast source after 10 years. They had to go out to hunt fog demons or sea beasts. Fog demons were divided into lower, middle, upper, and the more powerful Fog Demon King. The lower Fog Demon's battle strength was at least equivalent to 3 star Half-Step Great Saint, and the strongest could reach 4 star level. The middle Fog Demon's battle strength was at least 5 star and 6 star level. The upper Fog Demon's battle strength was at least 7 star and 8 star level. As for the so-called Fog Demon King, it was at least 9 star level. As for sea beasts were divided into levels the same as fog demons. However, sea beasts were more terrifying in the water. A 3 star battle strength could fight with the weakest fog demon, and maybe kill it and obtain the fog source. However, if they encountered stronger fog demons, they could only die. It was also because of this that it was impossible to find anyone with a combat strength below 4 stars on Bewildering Light Island. Little friend, you should cultivate well during these 10 years and strive to improve your strength. When you enter the Bewildering Light Ocean, if you are lucky enough, you can live longer, Zhao Mingkong said. Even though he had saved Chen Zong, it was merely a coincidence and not intentional. After all, he and Chen Zong were complete strangers. Now that he had introduced so many things to Chen Zong, it was also because of his personality. However, it was impossible for him to give up the fog source for Chen Zong to live in, unless the two of them were close enough to trust each other. Even an experienced person might not be able to see the other person's depth. At most, he would be more confident. In the end, what Silver Blade King Zhao Mingkong did was already extremely benevolent. Other than gratitude, Chen Zong only had gratitude. If it wasn't for Zhao Mingkong, Chen Zong wouldn't know how he would be now. Zhao Mingkong's cave was located on a mountain that was hundreds of meters high. It could be seen that it was made by a blade. The blade marks were obvious, but it had a natural feeling. From the fine blade marks, Chen Zong could see that Zhao Mingkong's blade skills were very high. It might even be above his sword skills. Of course, it was hard to say without sparring. The Heaven-Earth Yuan Qi here was indeed several times denser than when he first entered Bewildering Light Island. It was also several times purer. You can stay here for the time being, Zhao Mingkong said. Let me know when you want to leave Bewildering Light Island. I'll send you off. I won't leave in these 10 years. Thank you, Senior. Chen Zong was grateful from the bottom of his heart. What he was very interested in now was the Bewildering Light Realm. In general, the valuable things in the Bewildering Light Ocean were the fog crystals of fog demons, fog sources of fog demons, and the beast origins of sea beasts. Fog crystals could help in comprehending the mysteries of heaven and earth. Fog sources were the upgrade of fog crystals. The effect of comprehending the mysteries of heaven and earth would be better. As for beast origins, they were different. They were body-refining treasures. The Bewildering Light Realm was an independent space. It was related to leaving the Bewildering Light Ocean. Newcomers had one chance to enter the Bewildering Light Realm for free. If they wanted to enter the Bewildering Light Realm a second time, they would have to pay a fog source or beast origin. It didn't have to be high, just low grade. A low-grade fog source or beast origin represented the life of a low-grade fog demon or a low-grade sea beast. If they wanted to use fog crystals as a substitute, they would have to pay 1,000 fog crystals. After Chen Zong knew, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. It was because he only had 50-something fog crystals. 1,000 fog crystals meant that he would have to kill 1,000 fog demons. Furthermore, fog demons weren't easy to encounter. It was indeed not an easy thing to survive here. However, there was finally hope. He didn't have to wander around like before and couldn't find a way out. As long as there was a trace of hope, Chen Zong would grasp it tightly. Now that the hope seemed to be quite big, how could he give up? Taking advantage of this opportunity, Chen Zong asked Zhao Mingkong about the mysteries of the Bewildering Light Realm. The Bewildering Light Realm is a test for oneself. Zhao Mingkong first organized his thoughts, then said, "A cultivator must be outstanding in all aspects. Only then can he be perfect and become a true expert." Chen Zong immediately understood Zhao Mingkong's words. The test of the Bewildering Light Realm was a test for a true expert. For example, strength, speed, reaction, willpower, temperament, and so on. There are a total of 10 realms in the Bewildering Light Realm. If you can make it to the 7th realm, you will have the qualifications to live on the Bewildering Light Island forever. You won't need to pay any fog source or beast source, and you can also enter and exit the Bewildering Light Realm as you wish. Zhao Mingkong's words instantly made Chen Zong's eyes light up. If you can make it to the 8th realm, it's said that you can leave the Bewildering Light Ocean. Zhao Mingkong's eyes lit up. Leaving the Bewildering Light Ocean was the wish of many people, but it also made many people disappointed to the point of despair. What about the 9th realm? Chen Zong couldn't help but ask. I'm not sure. Zhao Mingkong smiled. If he wasn't sure about the 9th realm, then he was even less sure about the 10th realm. However, as long as he made it to the 8th realm, he would be able to leave. It was very attractive. Senior, has anyone left before? Chernzong couldn't help but ask. Yes, definitely. However, in the past 10,000 years, there hasn't been anyone, Zhao Mingkong directly replied. The test of the bewildering light realm is related to one's cultivation. If you want to challenge it, you can try it now, Zhao Mingkong said, or you can first cultivate here for a while, then go challenge it. Although he said that, Zhao Mingkong actually didn't think highly of Chernzong. Although the test of the bewildering light realm was related to one's cultivation, he himself had entered it before, so he clearly knew how difficult it was. The reason why he said that was because he felt that Chernzong would still have to leave within 10 years. Since he was going to leave, then it was very normal for him to challenge the bewildering light realm. It wouldn't be a wasted trip. Although Chernzong was very interested in the bewildering light realm and wanted to challenge it, he still suppressed this thought. Because he had arrived at a safe environment, so he needed to cultivate in seclusion for a while. In the past 2 years, he had wandered around the bewildering light ocean and constantly fought. It had brought him quite a bit of training and further stimulated his potential. It was a good time for him to properly tidy up and further improve himself. Since the test of the bewildering light realm was related to one's cultivation, then under the condition that one's cultivation didn't change, perhaps it would be more beneficial for the test to improve other aspects. Zhao Mingkong didn't say much. It was a coincidence that he was able to save Chernzong. Bringing Chernzong here could be considered as doing a good deed. His temperament was originally very good, so to him, this was just a small matter. Zhao Mingkong went to cultivate on his own, and Chernzong also temporarily opened a small cave residence at the side. After he made many arrangements, he entered the cave and began to cultivate in seclusion. Previously, Chernzong had a deeper understanding of the Tao of speed. Now was the best time to comprehend it. To save time, Chernzong directly took out a fog crystal and poured his divine sense into it to comprehend its profundities. Before this, Chernzong had never used a fog crystal. Thus, when he used it, he immediately felt that the effect of his comprehension was better. The profundities of heaven and earth seemed to appear more clearly in his eyes. After the power of the fog crystal was exhausted, Chernzong felt that he had a deeper understanding of the formless heavenly wind. Striking while the iron was hot, he immediately took out a second fog crystal and began to comprehend it. When the power of the third fog crystal was exhausted, Chernzong suddenly felt his body and mind tremble slightly. It was as if a breeze had blown past him. That breeze seemed to have come from the outside world, but it also seemed to have originated from within his body. In just a moment, Chernzong felt as if he had turned into a gust of wind and could soar in the void between heaven and earth. This feeling was very wonderful. Chernzong knew that his formless heavenly wind body technique had a breakthrough. Perfection realm. As expected, the perfection realm was incomparable to the perfection realm. Just this wonderful feeling alone was enough to make one unable to stop. It was as if one could really turn into a gust of wind. Without hesitation, Chernzong immediately came out of seclusion. As soon as he came out, he immediately performed the formless heavenly wind body technique. His body instantly turned into a gust of wind and circled between heaven and earth. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Everything was under his control. If he wanted to stop, he would stop. If he wanted to move, he would move. As long as there was a slight gap, he could turn into a gust of wind and pass through it. It was an incomparable feeling. The heavenly wind body technique was invisible and colorless. Now that it was formless, it had greatly improved his survivability. When he encountered a target that he could not defeat, this body technique would play a big role. However, Chernzong was not complacent, because the opponents he encountered now were too strong. The formless heavenly wind body technique in the perfection realm was not enough for him to contend against Luo Yen. Chapter 1671. On Bewildering Light Island, a few hundred meters above the mountain, a powerful aura suddenly soared into the sky. Soon after, a figure soared into the sky and slowly descended. "Congratulations, little friend," Zhao Mingkong, who had just exited his closed-door cultivation, said with a smile when he saw this scene. This was because he could see that Chen Zong's cultivation base had improved. The peak of the 8th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage. However, Zhao Mingkong did not take it to heart. After all, the improvement from the late 8th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage to the peak of the 8th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage was only a small improvement. The increase in strength was usually not that great. 10 years. No matter how fast one's cultivation base improved, it would at most reach the peak of the 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage. It would not reach the half-step Great Saint stage. Even the top peerless prodigy's strength would at most be equivalent to a 1-star half-step Great Saint stage when he reached the peak of the 9th Heaven Saint stage. Any higher and it would be equivalent to a 2-star at most. There was hope for him to survive against a 3-star. That was all. The difference between a 3-star and a 6-star was huge. It could be said with 100% certainty that a 6-star could kill a 3-star in one move. The difference in strength between them was many times greater. When one reached the half-step Great Saint stage, every improvement in strength would become more difficult. Therefore, there were fewer half-step Great Saints with high battle strength. "Senior, I plan to challenge the Bewildering Light Realm," Chen Zong said with a smile. After half a year of closed-door cultivation here, more than 50 mist crystals had been used up. Chen Zong's comprehension of the heaven and earth mystery had reached a higher level. It could be said that he had reached the limit of everything he could improve in a short period of time. It would not be easy for him to continue to improve. Chen Zong knew that even if he continued to cultivate in closed-door cultivation here for 8 or 9 years, he would not make much progress. After thinking about it, Chen Zong decided to challenge the Bewildering Light Realm. If he was lucky, he might be able to get through the 7th realm and obtain permanent residency. He might even be able to challenge the Bewildering Light Realm at will. "If that's the case, I'll bring you there," Zhao Mingkong said with a smile. He had just come out of seclusion, so there was no need for him to immediately go into seclusion. He could just take it as a walk. The Bewildering Light Realm was located at the center of Bewildering Light Island. There was an octagonal altar that was around 10 meters tall. The altar was dusty, as if it was the color of primal chaos. It was simple and ancient, and it was filled with a mysterious and profound aura. There were 8 huge pillars on top of the altar. They were about 100 meters tall, and seemed to be pointing straight at the sky. Each pillar was covered with complicated patterns. In the center of the altar, there was an octagonal piece that was about a meter tall. It was also covered with mysterious runes and patterns, and it was filled with indescribable profoundness. Overall, the altar was not very big. It was only about 1,000 meters in radius. However, when Chen Zong stood in front of it, he felt very small. It was as if the altar was a sleeping ancient god. When challenging the Bewildering Light Realm, only one person could enter at a time. The runic patterns on the 8 pillars and at the center of the altar were all flickering with different colored lights, indicating that someone was challenging the Bewildering Light Realm at this very moment. Wait. He waited for the challenger to come out. Not long after, 2 more figures flew over. "Old Zhao, you're here to challenge the Bewildering Light Realm again?" A laugh was heard. Looking back, it was a short and fat middle-aged man. Although his appearance was a little unsightly, this person was still a 6-star powerhouse. "I brought a little friend here to try." Zhao Mingkong smiled and said, "How about you? Did you improve again?" The 100 or so people on Bewildering Light Island all knew each other. Some of them were more familiar with each other, so they spoke more casually. Zhao Mingkong's relationship with this short and fat middle-aged man was quite good. "No, it's my little brother who wants to challenge." The short and fat middle-aged man smiled. Greetings, Silver Blade King. There was also a fat man next to the short and fat middle-aged man. He smiled and cupped his fist at Zhao Ming Kong. He had 5-star combat strength, but he was not as strong as the Silver Blade King. It was necessary to show some respect when they met. This little brother's cultivation. The short and fat middle-aged man stared at Chen Zong. He was slightly stunned and surprised. Saint Rudiment Realm. He was actually at the Saint Rudiment Realm. This was really rare. After all, since ancient times, there had never been a case of a Saint Rudiment Realm cultivator entering Bewildering Light Island. It was not impossible. Even if you were a mortal, you could enter Bewildering Light Island. The problem was that Bewildering Light Island was located in the center of the Bewildering Light Ocean. To reach Bewildering Light Island, one must first enter the Bewildering Light Ocean. Some people would be lost in the Bewildering Light Ocean for decades or even centuries before they could enter Bewildering Light Island by chance. Some people were luckier, and it might only take a few years. However, the Bewildering Light Ocean was not a place to go for a walk. It was a forbidden area filled with danger. Not to mention a Saint Rudiment Realm cultivator, even a top half-step Great Saint Powerhouse would die if they were unlucky. The higher one's strength, the greater the chance of survival. On the contrary, the lower one's strength, the greater the chance of death. A Saint Rudiment Realm cultivator might die soon after entering the Bewildering Light Ocean. How could he come to Bewildering Light Island? Therefore, when he saw Chen Zong, a Saint Rudiment Realm cultivator, the short and fat middle-aged man was naturally very surprised. My little brother's luck is not bad. Zhao Ming Kong smiled. Indeed, his luck is not bad. The short and fat middle-aged man smiled, but no one knew what he was thinking. Little friend Chen Zong, this is the Heaven-Battering King, and this is King Hun Shan. Zhao Ming Kong introduced them to Chen Zong. Greetings, seniors. Chen Zong cupped his fists and bowed. The Heaven-Battering King and King Hun Shan were brothers, and they were both body-refining powerhouses. Little friend, you don't have to be so polite. I have never seen a Saint Rudiment Realm cultivator break through the Bewildering Light Ocean. Little friend, you can go in first. The Heaven-Battering King smiled, and King Hun Shan naturally did not have any objections. An extremely tyrannical murderous intent spread across the sky, and the boundless evil qi condensed into a blood cloud that dyed half the sky red. The murderous intent was so strong that it caused everyone's expression to change drastically. Blood-killing King. King Hun Shan, who had a 5-star battle prowess, felt great pressure and looked solemn. Is this guy going crazy again? The Heaven-Battering King also looked a little solemn. Chen Zong felt that this aura was a little familiar. Wasn't it Luo Yan, who had played tricks on him time and time again? His title was Blood-Killing King. Little ant, you're really here. A gloomy voice sounded, causing Chen Zong's hair to stand on end. An extremely terrifying murderous intent attacked him, as if it came from the 9 Serenities hell. Immediately, the blood cloud in the sky condensed into a huge palm and struck down from the sky with endless power. It was as if a sea of blood was overturning, and it wanted to smash everything into pieces. Even Silver Blade King, Heaven-Battering King, and King Hun Shan were enveloped by this move. 10-year protection period. Zhao Ming Kong uttered these 5 words unhurriedly. Suddenly, the huge blood-red hand paused in the air and turned back into a blood cloud. A blood-red figure also appeared not far away, staring at them with shocking murderous intent, and the air was filled with coldness. 10-year protection period. Although blood-killing King Luo Yan was arrogant and confident, he was not stupid. If he really attacked, he would be killed by the power of Bewilderment Light Island. Although he felt great pressure and needed to find a way to vent, it did not mean that he did not want to live anymore. Luo Yan, this is not the place for you to behave atrociously, the Heaven-Battering King said in a solemn tone. He was a 6-star body refining expert. If he really fought, he would not be inferior to Luo Yan, not to mention that his brother and Zhao Mingkong were here. If Luo Yan insisted on attacking, the three of them would be enough to suppress him. Little ant, enjoy your last moments. Luo Yan was not angry, but his eyes were even colder. He stared at Chen Zong, and his voice became sharp and threatening. Live well before I kill you, Chen Zong replied unhurriedly. Ambitious. Ha 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 ha. Luo Yan turned into a blood-red light and flew away amidst his maniacal laughter. The heaven-battering king and King Hun Shan looked at Chen Zong in surprise and secretly shook their heads. Luo Yan was indeed ambitious, but he was too arrogant. Zhao Mingkong also secretly shook his head, but he did not say anything. On the altar, light suddenly flickered rapidly. Then, countless rays of light flowed to the center, converging and stretching, forming a 2-meter-tall chaotic light gate. A figure appeared in the light gate at the same time and stepped out. Greetings, Thunder Fire King. Whether it was Zhao Mingkong, the heaven-battering king, or King Hun Shan, they all cupped their fists to the man. Thunder Fire King. Chen Zong was secretly shocked. One of the 3 7-star powerhouses on Bewilderment Light Island was called Thunder Fire King. The Thunder Fire King only glanced at the 3 of them but did not respond. Immediately after, he glanced over at Chen Zong in surprise, seemingly curious as to why there was a Saint Realm Jr. here, but he did not say anything. His figure flickered, transforming into a crimson streak of light that shot through the sky like a bolt of lightning, disappearing in an instant. It seems that Thunder Fire King's challenge stopped at the 7th realm, the heaven-battering king side. There were more than 100 people on Bewilderment Light Island. Thunder Fire King was not only one of the strongest but also one of the most talented. However, after many years of hard work, he had only passed the 6th realm. He had never passed the 7th realm. The hope of others was even smaller. Little friend, go ahead, Zhao Mingkong said. After cupping his fists, Chen Zong's figure flashed and landed at the center of the altar. Suddenly, they felt waves of energy sweeping over, as if to verify Chen Zong's identity. Then, the 8 pillars lit up and went straight to the center along the lines, lighting up the runes and lines at the center. The runes and lines condensed and stretched upward, forming a 2-meter-tall gray chaotic gate. Chen Zong took a deep breath while feeling slightly nervous and excited. He took a step forward and stepped into the door of chaos, and then his figure seemed to have been swallowed up and vanished. Old Zhao, do you think he'll succeed? After Chen Zong disappeared, the heaven-battering king asked casually. No, I don't. Zhao Mingkong's answer was very direct. I just saved him from Luo Yan by chance. I'm a good person and let him enter Bewilderment Light Island. Since he has entered the island, it would be a waste if he didn't challenge the Bewilderment Light Realm. Moreover, challenging the Bewilderment Light Realm is a kind of training for oneself. Only by improving one's strength can one live longer in the Bewilderment Light Ocean. The heaven-battering king nodded and did not say anything else. He knew the Silver Blade King's character well. It was not surprising that the Silver Blade King saved a Saint Realm expert. In fact, the Silver Blade King had saved more than 1 or 2 people. Chapter 1672. With a single stride, the heavens and the earth were replaced. In an instant, Chen Zong appeared within a gray and hazy chaotic space. Challenger, state your name. A cold voice sounded. It did not seem to contain the slightest bit of emotion and was filled with a mechanical feeling. Chen Zong responded quickly. Chen Zong, Human Chi Refinement Stage, Peak of the 8th Heaven Saint Rudiment Stage, Body Refinement Stage, Peak of the 8th Heaven Chaotic Heaven Stage, Clone, Chi Refinement Stage, Peak of the 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment Stage. Please select your assessment system and target. The cold mechanical voice sounded again. Chi Refining Stage, Main Body. Chen Zong did not hesitate. It was obvious that he had more skills in chi refining stage and was good at sword technique. On the other hand, body refining stage gave him a stronger life-saving ability. Selection complete. As soon as the voice sounded, Chen Zong felt a tyrannical force descend and fall on his body. Then, Chen Zong felt his tyrannical blood chi and chaotic heaven force being sealed in an instant. He could not use them, and the strength of his body dropped to the level of a normal peak 8th level Saint Rudiment stage. This feeling made him feel weak all of a sudden. Chen Zong was not used to it, but his adaptability was very strong. He gradually adapted to this feeling. His clone was also sealed at the same time and could not use it. His storage ring was also sealed. At the same time, his divine armament was also sealed and he could not sense it. The 8th grade Purple Horizon Incineration Fire was also sealed. The assessment of the first stage of the Bewildering Light stage begins. Break through the first stage of the Bewildering Light stage and enter the second stage. Then, the gray mist in front of Chen Zong separated, as if heaven and earth had been opened. A dim corridor appeared in front of Chen Zong. It was pitch black in the depths of the corridor. Suddenly, lights lit up and illuminated both sides, allowing Chen Zong to see a black stone door at the end of the corridor that separated the two sides. The 10th stage door, Chen Zong muttered and stepped forward, quickly approaching the black stone door. He stretched out his hand and pushed, but the stone door didn't budge at all, as if it had taken root. Immediately, Chen Zong's palms, which were pressed against the stone door, trembled slightly. A tyrannical force immediately passed through his palms and directly bombarded the stone door. Kacha! 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 The pitch-black heavy stone door shattered into countless pieces and fell to the ground. There was still a long corridor in front of them. As the stone door was broken and Chen Zong stepped in, the lights on both sides of the wall lit up one by one. At the end was the second black stone door. It didn't look any different from the first one. Chen Zong approached the stone door and touched it again. His sharp senses immediately told Chen Zong that this stone door was thicker and sturdier than the first one. The hardness of the first stone door just happened to reach the peak of the 8th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage, while the hardness of the second stone door exceeded that of an ordinary peak of the 8th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage. Break again. The third stone door was even thicker and sturdier. However, it was still at the 8th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage, and not the 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage. Naturally, such a stone door couldn't stop Chen Zong. The 10th stage door. As the name implied, there were 10 stone doors. One had to break all 10 stone doors one by one to pass through the first stage and enter the second stage. Moreover, there was only one chance to attack each stone door. One had to consider whether one's attack could break it or not. If one couldn't, it would be considered a failure and one would be sent out of the Bewildering Light realm. If one wanted to challenge it, one would have to pay the Fog Source or Beast Source. If one had enough strength but failed because they underestimated the stone door and didn't use their full strength, it would be too tragic. Therefore, before Chen Zong made a move, he would first sense the stone door's strength and try his best to have an idea of its strength so that there wouldn't be any accidents when he attacked. The fourth stone door's strength was at the peak of the 8th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage and was close to the 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage. After all, the difference between the 8th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage and the 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage was huge. However, the fifth stone door's strength was at the early 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage. Of course, it was only at the early 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage. This was nothing to Chen Zong, and he could easily break it. The sixth stone door's strength was at the intermediate 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage, and it was broken. The seventh stone door's strength was at the intermediate 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage, and it was broken. The eighth stone door's strength was at the intermediate 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage, and it was broken. The ninth stone door's strength was at the late 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage, and it was broken. The 10th stone door was in front of him, The aura from the 10th stone door was even more intense. Chen Zong didn't need to come into contact with it to know that the strength of the 10th stone door was even higher. Since the strength of the 10th stone door's strength was at the peak 9th heaven Saint Rudiment stage, and it was one stage higher than his current cultivation base. This was not a test of one's martial attainment but the strength of one's cultivation method. If one's cultivation method was not strong enough or if one's saint energy was not strong enough, one would not be able to break it and pass the first stage. If it was a body refinement cultivator, it would be a test of chaos heavenly energy. Strength. This was a test of strength. Strength did not only represent the strength of one's body. The 10th stone door was broken by Chen Zong's attack. Taking a step forward, Chen Zong stepped into the gray chaos again. Chen Zong has passed the first stage. Do you wish to challenge the second stage? The cold mechanical voice sounded. The first stage was not that difficult. Everyone on Bewildering Light Island could pass the first stage, so it was not a big deal. However, the further one went, the more difficult it would be. According to the Silver Blade King, Zhao Mingkong, the first 3 stages were not that difficult and were relatively easy to pass. However, from the 4th stage onwards, the difficulty increased significantly. The 5th stage was much more difficult than the 4th stage. This was why many people could not pass the 7th stage. Challenge. Chen Zong naturally wouldn't give up just like that. It was just the first level, and the difficulty wasn't high. His purpose in entering this place was for the 7th level. Even if he couldn't pass the 7th level, he would do his best and challenge his limit. He would treat this as a form of training to stimulate his own potential and improve himself further. The second stage is the streamer stage. If you pass it within the time limit, you can enter the third stage. As soon as he finished speaking, the scene in front of Chen Zong changed again. A passageway appeared as if it was splitting heaven and earth apart. The passageway seemed to be in the sky, with wisps of light floating around. Chen Zong looked forward but could not see the end. At the same time, a huge light leak appeared in the sky. There were bits of light sprinkling down from the light leak. When the upper part of the light completely fell to the lower part, it meant that the time limit was over. Without hesitation, Chen Zong immediately used his movement technique and quickly moved forward. Formless heavenly wind. Complete stage. He seemed to have turned into a gust of wind as he sped forward. Chen Zong's speed was already extremely fast. After cultivating the secondary divine power, formless heavenly wind, to the complete stage, it was even more shocking. He swept past like a gust of wind, leaving the wisps of light behind him in the blink of an eye. Using the first stage as an example, the second stage tested one's speed. It was pure speed. If one wanted to pass the streamer stage within the time limit, one's speed would have to exceed one's cultivation base by a whole realm. In other words, Chen Zong's cultivation base was at the peak of the 8th level Saint Rudiment stage, but his speed had to be at the peak of the 9th level Saint Rudiment stage. This was the bottom line. Before the formless heavenly wind broke through to the complete stage, Chen Zong's speed was faster than an ordinary peak 9th level Saint Rudiment stage cultivator. Therefore, for Chen Zong, the speed test of the second stage of the streamer stage was nothing. Before the light even reached half of the area, Chen Zong could already see the end of the streamer stage. It was a slowly rotating vortex filled with psychedelic colors. Without hesitation, Chen Zong plunged into it and entered a chaotic gray. Chen Zong has passed the second stage. Do you want to challenge the third stage? The cold mechanical voice sounded again. Yes, Chen Zong answered without hesitation. The third stage is the 1,000-flower path. Pass the 1,000-flower path within the time limit and you can enter the fourth stage. The chaos changed again. A pink flower seemed to fall in front of Chen Zong's eyes. It was light and agile, and its trajectory was natural. It was as if a beautiful painting was slowly unfolding in front of his eyes. Chunzong saw a small path, and on both sides of the path were trees. There was not a single leaf on any of the trees, only pink flowers that were in full bloom. A strong floral fragrance filled the air, causing people to be intoxicated. This was a small path among the flowers that was suitable for walking with one's lover. But in reality, this was a test. The first stage tested one's own strength, the second stage tested one's pure speed, and the third stage tested one's reaction speed. Strength, speed, and reaction speed were all crucial to any cultivator. It was not surprising that there was a test like this. When the light appeared again, Chunzong's silhouette flickered as he sped forward. He had to pass the 1,000-flower path within the time limit to enter the fourth stage. For Chunzong, the first and second stages would not have much of a tempering effect. After all, his ability had exceeded the upper limit. The third stage would not have much of a tempering effect either. With this thought, Chunzong did not stop. He stepped into the path among the flowers in an instant. Then, as if an invisible wind blew past, flowers broke off from the branches one by one. They floated out lightly and nimbly. In the next moment, every flower that floated out had a few or even a dozen petals. Their trajectories became even more difficult to predict. They attacked from all directions and floated toward Chunzong. He could not be touched by the petals. Otherwise, it would be equivalent to failing the stage. Chunzong used the heavenly wind formless body technique to avoid the petals. He quickly moved forward. He turned into a gust of wind, but it was not real wind and would not affect the petals at all. Along the way, countless petals swept over and gathered as if controlled by an invisible force. They almost formed a wall of flowers, blocking the entire path among the flowers. Chunzong's figure was very strange. He shuttled through the small and crisscrossed gaps, causing the wall of flowers to be unable to do anything. The light in the light kept falling like dust. Chunzong ignored it. He did not even look at it because there was no need to. The first 3 stages were the least difficult. If he could not even pass the first 3 stages, then it was better to leave Bewildering Light Island as soon as possible. Soon, Chunzong's sharp eyes saw the end of the path among the flowers. It was right in front of him, about 10,000 meters away. This distance of 10,000 meters was nothing, even with countless petals swirling in the air. Chapter 1673. The heaven-battering king broke the silence and said, "Old Zhao, it shouldn't be a problem for the person you saved to pass through the first 3 realms. It should be." Zhao Mingkong did not say it was absolute, but he agreed. After all, based on his observation, Chunzong was not weak. He should be an exceptional prodigy. It should not be difficult for an exceptional prodigy to pass through the first 3 realms of the Bewildering Light realm. The difficult part was starting from the 4th realm. The 4th realm was called the Falling Star realm. To a certain extent, the 4th realm was a synthesis and sublimation of the first 3 realms. The 4th realm was the Falling Star realm. Chunzong stood under the crimson sky. Beneath his feet was an endless wasteland. Streaks of crimson light streaked across the sky, leaving behind streaks of crimson burning trails. It was extremely dazzling. The clouds in the sky were dyed red, as if they had been set ablaze. It was as if a raging fire was burning the sky. Standing on the barren wasteland and looking up at the crimson sky, he suddenly felt as insignificant as a speck of dust. Suddenly, a crimson flowing light reflected in Chunzong's eyes changed direction and rapidly fell downward. Judging from its trajectory, it seemed to be heading straight for him. It was coming menacingly. An astonishing aura swept out like a tidal wave. Layers of ripples spread out in the void, stacking on top of each other and dyeing the sky a faint red. Blazing! An astonishing blazing aura rushed straight at him, as though it was going to burn him into a charcoal. Boom! An incomparably shocking momentum rushed over, and an extremely terrifying aura pressed down from the sky, making it difficult for him to breathe, almost suffocating him, as if his body was about to be suppressed. Chen Zong saw a 1-meter-wide rock in the crimson light. It was burning fiercely and turned into a meteorite. The power of the attack was so strong that it had surpassed the power of an ordinary 8th-level Saint Rudiment stage. It was at the peak of the 9th-level Saint Rudiment stage. His cultivation base was at the peak of the 8th-level Saint Rudiment stage, but the power of the falling crimson meteorite was at the peak of the 9th-level Saint Rudiment stage. It was 1 level higher than him. No ordinary 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage cultivator would dare to take such a powerful attack head-on. Even those at the peak of the 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage wouldn't dare to take it head-on. However, Chen Zong felt that although this meteorite was powerful, it was not enough to threaten him. However, Chen Zong had no intention of attacking. His figure flashed and he dodged the attack. Boom! The meteor struck the ground, causing it to tremble incessantly. Cracks spread out rapidly from the point where the meteor landed. Flames spread out along the countless cracks, and countless fist-sized fragments shot out in all directions like arrows from a bow. Even though the power of the fragment was not as strong as a meteorite, it was still extremely powerful, reaching the intermediate 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage. Even an ordinary peak 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage cultivator would find it difficult to face such power. Even if they weren't injured, they would still be in a difficult position. Chen Zong, on the other hand, dodged all of the attacks effortlessly. His expression was calm and untouched. However, this was just the beginning. The crimson streaks of light that streaked across the sky seemed to have received some kind of order. They all changed directions and fell to the ground. Each of them was a stone that weighed a few 100 kilograms. They were burning with raging crimson flames and emitted a terrifying power as they fell. 3 of them. In an instant, a total of 3 meteorites fell to the ground where Chen Zong was standing without mercy. The power of each meteorite was at the peak of the 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage. After these 3 meteorites, more meteorites fell from the sky. Chen Zong immediately understood the meaning of the falling star stage. The assessment of this stage required one to face a meteorite or even a meteor shower and survive its attack. As for when one would be considered to have passed the test, he had no idea. When he thought about it carefully, this was one of the torturous aspects. Not knowing when the test would end would make one feel even more pressured. After all, only by knowing when the test would end would one feel more confident. At the very least, one would be mentally prepared. However, if one didn't know when the test would end, one would be at a loss and feel even more pressured. For a moment, Chen Zong didn't feel any pressure. It wasn't that he had never experienced something similar before. However, he had already gone through it. This time would be the same. Chen Zong executed the formless heavenly wind movement technique and dodged swiftly. Boom, boom, boom. 3 meteorites fell and exploded one after another. The ground shook even more violently. Terrifying fragments shot out in all directions and covered everything like a dense rainstorm. However, Chen Zong dodged them all. More meteorites fell. For a moment, it seemed as though a meteor shower was falling from the sky. Regardless of the danger, just looking at it gave one a sense of breathtaking beauty. However, under this breathtaking beauty, there was an extreme danger. Not to mention an ordinary peak 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage cultivator, even some of the more powerful peak 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage cultivators would not be able to escape death. It felt as though meteorites were falling from the sky. They were so densely packed that it seemed as though they had completely enveloped the wasteland. No matter where one went, they would be attacked by the meteorite. There was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide. The wasteland seemed to stretch as far as the eye could see. However, it was so empty that it was difficult to find a place to hide. In other words, one could only face it head-on. Moreover, blindly dodging was not a solution. For example, right now, as Chern Zong was constantly dodging, he was keenly aware of the changes in the meteor shower. It was no longer as chaotic and random as before. Instead, it seemed to have been slightly adjusted. After the adjustment, there was a change that sealed the surroundings. The power emitted by the meteors seemed to have faintly merged into one and suppressed everything. In just an instant, the pressure Chern Zong faced increased several times. The pressure was still not strong enough for him. However, Chern Zong knew that if he continued to use his movement technique to dodge, the pressure would increase again. In the end, he didn't know how strong it would become. Since that was the case, there was no need to dodge anymore. His eyes narrowed and a hint of sharpness shot out from his pupils. The deep night sword at his waist was unsheathed in an instant. The sword light was pitch black. It streaked across the void, as if bringing with it a trace of darkness. The black sword light was not conspicuous. It was only as thick as a finger. However, in an instant it pierced through the void and hit a meteorite 100 meters away. The meteorite paused for a moment and instantly exploded into dozens of smaller pieces, rushing in all directions. He swung his sword. The meteorites that were bombarding him were exploded one by Chern Zong's sword in the air. After the explosion, although they were still powerful, their power was reduced by a level and the threat was reduced. Boom, boom, boom. Every meteorite that was attacking him from all directions paused in mid-air 100 meters away, and then exploded. It was as magnificent as a flourishing firework, enchanting and fascinating. Chern Zong's figure stood erect under the flourishing firework. His back was as sharp as a sword, faintly piercing the sky as if it was going to pierce through the 9 heavens. It was like a painting that had been passed down since ancient times. Chern Zong swung his sword again, and instantly, the broken pieces of the meteorite were shattered a second time. Moreover, they were scattered in all directions and collided with other fragments, but they were unable to affect Chern Zong in the slightest. If someone were to see this, they would definitely be amazed. The test of the 4th realm was the combination and sublimation of the previous 3 realms. Chern Zong was not afraid. He believed that he could pass through it with his own strength. As for the 5th realm, Chern Zong was not sure. However, he would think about it after passing the 4th realm. However, what would be considered passing the 4th realm? As Chern Zong pondered, he swung his sword and shattered meteorites one after another. Although the meteorites were very powerful, they were nothing to him. It was just that there were a little more of them, which gave him some pressure. Although his body refining cultivation was suppressed, Chern Zong did not find it difficult to deal with them with his qi refining cultivation. If Zhao Mingkong and the others knew, they would be very surprised. They speculated that Chern Zong might be able to pass the 4th realm, but it would definitely be very difficult. Who would have thought that not only did Chern Zong easily pass the first 3 realms, but he also did not suffer much pressure in the 4th realm. This was because they did not know Chern Zong's ability. Chern Zong's foundation was very strong and profound. His strength was astonishing. During that half a year of closed-door training, not only did he fully tap into the potential that was stimulated by more than 2 years of pressure and tempering in the bewildering light sea, he also used up the power of more than 50 fog crystals to comprehend the mysteries of heaven and earth on a deeper level. Therefore, his strength was much stronger than half a year ago. Even if his cultivation was the same, it was also stronger. Boom, boom, boom. More and more meteorites fell and became more and more concentrated. The momentum became more and more violent and the pressure increased. It felt as if the sky was about to collapse and suppress everything. Chern Zong faintly felt that it was difficult to breathe. This was also caused by the suppression of his body refining cultivation. Otherwise, with his strong physique, he could easily resist this feeling. However, even if his body refining cultivation was suppressed, Chern Zong was not afraid with his qi refining cultivation. This was like a battle of life and death. Chen Zong did not treat this as a game from the beginning. This was a battle of life and death. If he could not withstand it, he might be killed. Of course, if he was killed here, he would not really die. He would just leave after failing the challenge. However, if he did not face it directly, he would develop bad habit. The meteorite shower could not do anything to Chen Zong. It seemed to be enraged. The red color became more and more intense, and more meteorites appeared. They became more and more concentrated and violent. The rain turned into a storm. Is there no end to this? After muttering to himself, Chen Zong suddenly soared into the sky, passing through the meteorites in an instant. When he reached the highest point he could reach, he slashed out with his sword. Suddenly, countless sword lights, sword chi, and sword rays surged and gathered into a sword, turning into an extremely sharp black sword ray. It was as thin as a hair, but extremely tough and could easily tear through everything. Kill. Heaven and earth were aligned. With this sword, the sky suddenly darkened as if dusk had fallen. The void was directly torn apart, and the meteorites that had just fallen were also split in half in an instant. A giant crack appeared in the sky as if it had been torn apart by the sword. The crack quickly spread until it seemed to stretch endlessly before it gradually shattered. This sword seemed to have exceeded the upper limit of this arcane realm and broken its limit. Vaguely, Chen Zong came to a realization. He had broken through. Chapter 1674. The first stage of the bewildering light realm was the tenfold door. The second stage was the flowing light realm. The third stage was the 10,000 flowers realm. These were the three basic stages, and they were the easiest to pass. According to the Silver Blade King, Zhao Mingkong, one would be rewarded after passing the three basic stages. The reward would be chosen after the challenge. The difficulty of the fourth stage increased significantly. It was the combination and enhancement of the three basic stages. Without sufficient strength, one could forget about passing it. As for the fifth stage, it was called the blood-dripping stage. Chen Zong quickly understood the meaning of this stage. In a wasteland that stretched as far as the eye could see, the wind was as sharp as a blade, and the world was filled with an indescribable murderous intent. The murderous intent was faint at first, but it gradually increased like a rising tide, becoming more and more intense. A gust of wind swept up the dust and sand in the air, as if a door of nothingness had been opened. A figure appeared and walked over. In an instant, the murderous intent increased by a few notches. As the dust and sand swept away, the figure appeared clearly before Chen Zong. A body covered in blood-red armor, and holding a long saber, like a lone wolf walking in the wasteland, filled with endless desolation. Traces of cold aura surrounded the figure, fluctuating endlessly. The blood-armored man raised his eyelids. Instantly, two extremely sharp cold lights shot out, piercing through the void as if they were going to pierce through Chen Zong's body. He took a step forward and suddenly turned into a blood-red bolt of lightning, extremely fast. The long saber was also unsheathed in an instant, traversing hundreds of meters in an instant. The saber was like a blood-red bolt of lightning with extreme murderous intent as it slashed through the air. Extremely fast. Extremely ruthless. It abandoned all elegance, leaving only the most direct and pure killing. It was like a saber technique that was honed from mountains of corpses and seas of blood. One slash of the saber would only result in death. An ordinary peak 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment stage cultivator would definitely not be able to block this saber. Chen Zong's expression did not change, and his body did not move at all. Until the saber slashed down and was about to hit him, his right hand trembled, and the deep night sword was unsheathed. The sword light streaked across the void and arrived first, slashing through the opponent's body. The blood-red saber light paused and then dissipated. The figure also turned into nothingness. A gust of wind swept past, and 2 figures in blood-red armor appeared, attacking Chen Zong from the left and right. Another slash. 4 figures clad in blood-red armor. 8 figures clad in blood-colored armor. 16 figures in blood-red armor. Every time Chen Zong killed someone with a single slash of his sword, more figures in blood-red armor would appear, doubling the previous number. Each of the figures in blood-red armor was stronger than an ordinary peak 9th Heaven Saint Realm cultivator. Their saber skills were sharp and ruthless, shocking to the extreme. It was a pure saber skill that was terrifying. Chen Zong also found that the more people in blood-red armor there were, the more obvious the connection between them became. It was as if they were about to form a battle formation, which invisibly strengthened their power. 1 easy, 2 easy, 4 easy. But Chen Zong also found that as the number of people increased, the pressure he faced increased. The 64 men in blood-red armor were all killed by Chen Ye's sword. Chen Zong also felt a little tired. His body-refining cultivation was suppressed, and his physical strength was not as good as before. In the face of so many opponents' fearless attacks, even if Chen Zong killed them all, it would not be easy for him. Looking at the 128 men in blood-red armor, Chen Zong's face became more and more solemn. Every man in blood-red armor exuded a shocking murderous aura. When the murderous aura gathered, it became more and more frightening, like a murderous storm. 1 man in blood-red armor was Lone Wolf. A group of men in blood-red armor was a pack of wolves. Kill. The 128 men in blood-red armor immediately drew their long sabers and charged forward in waves. The saber lights were dense and continuous, covering the sky and the sun. It was as if the long saber waves were rolling, and there was no gap to be seen. It was suffocating. The shocking pressure swept over, making Chen Zong's body sink. For a moment, he felt as if he could not move. Fight. Using the heavenly wind formless body technique to the extreme, he turned into a gust of wind and passed through the undetectable gaps between the saber light. The Chen Yi slashed out with Chen Ye's sword and immediately killed 2 men in blood-red armor. The blood-dripping realm, the blood-dripping wasteland, was a bloody battle that would not end until one of them died. Kill, kill, kill. Chen Zong felt his exhaustion increasing. His strength was constantly being consumed, and his recovery speed could not keep up. When the last man in blood-red armor died under his sword, Chen Zong's breathing became rapid. He quickly circulated the Genesis sword origin technique to constantly restore his consumed strength. Unfortunately, his storage ring was sealed, and he could not take out any elixirs to restore his strength. However, as long as he broke through this realm, his consumed strength would be restored. 256 men in blood-red armor appeared around him, densely surrounding him in a circle. Extremely terrifying and incomparably fierce murderous aura locked onto him, suddenly increasing the pressure on Chen Zong. 128 men in blood-red armor were already so difficult to kill. 256 men in blood-red armor would be even more difficult. Chen Zong estimated that his chi cultivation strength should be comparable to a 1-star half-step Great Sage powerhouse. However, it was not easy to face so many strong enemies without fear of death. However, the bloody battle was endless. No matter what, he had to do his best to break through the 5th realm. This was still not his limit. Fight. Bloody battle. His strength was being consumed more and more, and his arm that was wielding the sword became more and more sore. There was a faint tingling sensation. Chen Zong knew that this was a symptom of overconsumption. He did not know how long it had been since he last had this symptom. At the same time, there was a kind of excitement from the bottom of his heart. He had not experienced this feeling of exhaustion to the point that his body was sore for many years. One by one, the men in blood-red armor were killed by Chen Zong. However, Chen Zong still suffered some injuries as he tried his best to dodge. However, the saber wounds on his body did not weaken Chen Zong. On the contrary, it seemed to have opened up the wildness in Chen Zong's heart. He released, wantonly, and wielded his sword. Kill, kill, kill! As if he had turned into a mad demon, his sword kept slashing. There were fewer and fewer men in blood-red armor, but the saber wounds on Chen Zong's body were increasing. However, the light in his eyes was getting brighter. The fierce battle was endless. The bloody battle was endless. 4 long sabers slashed through the air, locking on to the east, west, north, and south. There seemed to be a connection between the 4 sabers, making Chen Zong unable to dodge at all. At this point in the bloody battle, although he was excited, his body was very tired, and he did not have much strength left. In the face of these 4 saber attacks, Chen Zong wanted to dodge, but he felt powerless. In the distance, the 5th saber light cut through the sky and was about to pierce him. Dangerous. This dangerous situation was not that the opponent was too strong, but that there were too many opponents. Under the situation where his strength was limited, he had fought until now. His strength was almost exhausted, and he himself had also suffered some injuries. The Great Success Universal Flow Force field broke out again, and it was also the last time. Thousands of torrents rushed out in an instant, rushing in all directions. The Sunken Knight's sword also slashed out again. Kill. The 4 saber lights paused, and 4 figures were killed in an instant. Chen Zong took a step forward, and his sword seemed to cut through the void, cutting through everything. The saber and the sword collided in an instant. Chen Zong used the last of his strength to break the saber, and the trajectory of the saber deviated. Then, his long sword broke through the air. The sword pierced through the head of the man in blood-red armor. Kill. After the Sunken Knight's sword was pulled out, it fell directly. Chen Zong felt that his right arm seemed to have lost feeling, and he was exhausted. Starting from 1 opponent, it became 2, 4, 8, and kept increasing until there were 256 opponents just now. Chen Zong fought continuously, and his strength was constantly consumed, and there was no elixir or time to recover. At this point, his strength was completely exhausted, and his arms, especially the right arm that held the sword, seemed to have lost feeling. Fortunately, no new opponents appeared. Otherwise, if there were more opponents, there would be a total of 512 people, and he was afraid that he would not be able to pass this realm. With so many strong opponents, Chen Zong estimated that there were very few people who could pass this realm. After all, their cultivation was much higher than his, and their strength was not weak. They would cooperate with each other, and kill decisively and fearlessly. Fortunately, he won. In this battle, except for not using the power of the Lingwu, Chen Zong had done his best. After all, his body-refining cultivation was directly sealed, and he could not use the doppelganger of Azura. In addition, although his divine thoughts were not affected, the Xiaoyu divine weapon was also sealed. As a result, Chen Zong could only use the strength of the Qi refinement realm. After passing through the 5th realm, the wasteland disappeared, and turned back into a gray chaos. Chen Zong felt traces of cool air quickly spread from all directions and entered his body. His exhausted strength was immediately recovered, and not long after, his strength was restored to its peak. His injuries were also healed, and there were no traces left. Chen Zong could feel that the energy in his body had become even purer after recovering from the exhaustion. This was extremely rare. After all, the purity of his strength was far superior to that of cultivators of the same level. If he wanted to continue purifying his strength, he would either have a great encounter or a breakthrough in his cultivation technique. Now that he could purify his strength even more, it was naturally something worth celebrating. Chen Zong has passed through the 5th realm. Do you want to challenge the 6th realm? The cold mechanical voice sounded again. Yes. Chen Zong's tone was incomparably firm. The 6th realm, the 3 punishments platform. The challenge begins. As the voice fell, Chen Zong suddenly felt that his body was unable to move. Immediately after, a pitch-black chain, as thick as an arm, quickly slithered from left and right like a dragon or snake emerging from the abyss. It wrapped around his arms, then quickly coiled down along his shoulders, and continuously coiled around his body. Then, gray pillars appeared on both sides of the chains. The other end of the chains was covered with lines. The lines looked like swords, axes, and hammers, and they emitted a shocking aura. This was a high platform. This was a high platform used for execution. Chen Zong was locked in it, as if he was a prisoner waiting to be executed. Power erupted. Chen Zong's face suddenly sank because he realized that his strength had completely disappeared. Whether it was body refining, qi cultivation, or divine sense, all of his strength had disappeared. It was as if he had turned from a powerful saint realm cultivator into an ordinary person, waiting to be executed. What was the test of this realm? Chen Zong could not help but think quickly. Chapter 1675. Sixth Realm. Platform of Three Punishments. Boom. A bolt of crimson lightning flashed across the dark sky. Endless dark clouds rolled and gathered from all directions. In the blink of an eye, the sky was completely covered. The pressure was so low that it felt like it was about to collapse. Chen Zong tried to struggle, but he found that he could not move at all. The dark clouds were surging like a raging tide, suppressing heaven and earth. Chen Zong felt oppressed from the bottom of his heart. Incomparably oppressive. So oppressive that he almost collapsed. This kind of oppressive feeling grew stronger with the passage of time, directly attacking his mind. The patterns on the two punishment pillars quickly lit up. Then, as if drawn by a mysterious force, they all left the pillars and rushed into the sky, turning into swords, sabers, axes, spears, hammers, and other weapons. The blades of the sabers, swords, and axes were astonishingly sharp, as if they could tear the void apart. The tip of the long spear was extremely sharp, as if nothing in the world could withstand it. The big hammer was heavy and powerful, as if it could crush everything. In an instant, the long sword broke through the air and slashed down. This sword seemed to be able to split the heavens and earth apart as it slashed towards Chen Zong. There was no way for him to dodge. The sword directly landed on Chen Zong's body, slashing open his back. The intense pain caused Chen Zong to involuntarily tremble. The long sword disappeared, and the long saber slashed down. It was as if it could split the mountains and the seas. It slashed fiercely at Chen Zong's shoulder, almost severing his entire shoulder. Blood spurted out like a fountain. The sharp pain swept through Chen Zong's body, causing him to tremble uncontrollably. After the long saber slashed down, it disappeared. The giant axe slashed down fiercely, as if it could split heaven and earth. Its power was unparalleled. Ferocious. The axe slashed directly at Chen Zong's head, as if it wanted to split it open. Chen Zong instantly felt as if his head had been struck by an enormous force, causing it to shake endlessly. The indescribable pain seemed to make his soul fly out of his body, causing his facial features to warp and his entire body to tremble uncontrollably. The intense pain was like a tide, wave after wave, continuing without end. However, Chen Zong was still alive. He was still alive. He did not die just like that. The giant axe disappeared, leaving behind a terrifying wound on his head. Fresh blood flowed out, dyeing his entire face red, making him look incomparably sinister. The long spear struck down like a shooting star, piercing through the air. In an instant, it pierced through the back and came out from the abdomen, leaving behind a round wound. The wound was broken and blood gushed out unceasingly. A section of the intestines even slid out along with the blood, dangling down and swaying. However, Chen Zong was still alive. With his strong willpower, he could not die. Even though Chen Zong felt excruciating pain all over his body, He could feel his strength draining away. It was a feeling that he was about to die. But he couldn't die. Once he died, it would be over. No matter what, he had to hold on. He couldn't die. He absolutely couldn't die. Alive. Blood gushed out like a fountain, covering Chen Zong's eyes. When he opened his eyes, all he could see was red and nothing else. The sledgehammer suddenly burst forth with an extremely tyrannical aura and instantly smashed down. Boom! The sledgehammer seemed to be suppressing everything in the air, as if it was going to shatter the sky and the earth. It mercilessly smashed down on Chen Zong's body. Chen Zong's entire body trembled violently. Blood gushed out from the wound in his mouth like a fountain, and his strength and vitality leaked out continuously. Live. You must live. The first punishment of the 3 punishments platform, the knife punishment. Chen Zong was stripped of all his strength and reduced to an ordinary person. All he had was a strong willpower that had been tempered thousands of times. The test of this realm was one's willpower. If one had great strength but not a strong willpower, one could not be considered a powerhouse. However, any powerhouse must have an extremely strong willpower. However, the pain of enduring the knife punishment with the body of an ordinary person was indescribable. Excruciating pain. Bone-deep pain. Soul-deep pain. This was a pain that could tear a person apart. He could feel his blood flowing out continuously, and he could feel his strength draining away. Along with the loss of his blood and strength was his vitality. Once his vitality was drained, he would die. If he died here, he might not really die, but he would fail the challenge. The 6th realm. That Thunder Fire King seems to have reached the 6th realm, Chen Zong thought to distract himself to relieve the pain in his body. The first punishment is over. What about the second punishment? Chen Zong thought again. Boom! An extremely shocking sound suddenly exploded out, and it surged and shook the heavens and the earth, causing the entire execution platform to tremble without end. Streaks of crimson lightning flashed through the dark clouds, like lightning dragons shuttling back and forth. Traces of electric arcs appeared in the air and spread out. The moment they touched the 2 punishment pillars, they were immediately absorbed and quickly condensed along the 2 punishment pillars. They passed through the 2 black chains and spread to Chen Zong's body at an astonishing speed. Electric. The power of the electric arcs spread all over his body, causing Chen Zong's body to tremble uncontrollably. The feeling of being electrocuted, combined with the injuries caused by the knife punishment, made the pain even more intense. A streak of crimson lightning, like an evil dragon coming out of the abyss, suddenly shot down from the sky. It was as sharp as a sword, constantly moving forward, tearing the void, and mercilessly bombarding Chen Zong's body without any hesitation. Unable to dodge, Chen Zong didn't even have any premonition. He was immediately struck by the sword-like scarlet lightning bolt. The sudden sharp pain almost made Chen Zong faint. If his willpower wasn't strong enough, he would have fainted already. But when he was awake, Chen Zong felt even more intense pain. The extremely strong power of the electric arcs raged crazily on his body, as if it wanted to tear and shatter all his muscles, bones, and internal organs into powder. The wounds on his body also hurt several times more with the raging lightning. Pain. Extreme pain. This pain was several times more intense than the knife punishment in the first punishment. Chen Zong clenched his teeth, and blood kept oozing out from the roots of his teeth to resist this extreme pain. It was indescribable. This pain was as if his entire body was being torn apart by the most violent force. Immediately, the second streak of crimson lightning struck down. It was about half the size of the first one, and the power it contained was also much stronger. When this streak of lightning hit Chen Zong's body trembled even more violently, and the pain increased again. Then, the third streak of lightning struck down. Chen Zong didn't feel any pain from this streak of lightning, as if it had surpassed his limit. But then, the sharp pain was like a volcanic eruption, drowning Chernzong. Hang in there. No matter what, he had to hang in there. Chernzong had a further feeling that in this test, he wouldn't die no matter what, because there was a mysterious force protecting him. But if he fainted, it meant that he had failed the test. The 3 punishment platforms had a total of 3 punishments. Now that he had endured the first one, he was enduring the second one. No matter what, he had to endure it. He couldn't pass out. His mind was like a sword, sharpening the edge. This was a test, and also a kind of training for his mind and will. The second punishment, Heavenly Thunder Punishment. The Heavenly Thunder Punishment consisted of a total of 3 streaks of heavenly lightning. Generally speaking, most people who reached the 6th realm could only endure the first punishment, the saber punishment, and would pass out during the second punishment. Only a few people could endure the second punishment and enter the third punishment, but they would also pass out during the third punishment. The third punishment, Heavenly Fire Punishment. The crimson lightning that filled the sky instantly disappeared without a trace. Chernzong didn't even have time to catch his breath before the dark clouds were dyed red and quickly spread out. An astonishing blazing aura also spread out. Fire, fire, fire. Wisps of flames spread out from the red clouds, burning wantonly as if they wanted to burn everything to ashes. In the blink of an eye, the flames continued to spread, becoming incomparably blazing. Its power was boundless, and it covered the sky and earth. Burn. Burn crazily. As if it was too blazing, balls of flames fell from above, landing around the 3 punishment platforms and burning fiercely. In just a few seconds, the sky and earth were burning with flames, and the temperature rose rapidly. Chernzong felt as if he was about to be roasted to a crisp. Under the saber punishment, Chernzong's body was broken, and wounds were everywhere. Under the Heavenly Thunder punishment, Chernzong's wounds no longer bled because they were charred by the lightning. His entire body was covered with terrifying cracks, and he looked as if he would shatter at any time, like a broken porcelain. However, Chernzong's eyes became brighter and brighter. Mind, will. Under these 2 punishments, not only was he not defeated, but he became even more tenacious. The third punishment come. Chernzong was fearless. This was a training. He couldn't defeat himself. The heavenly fire spread, turning into balls of fire that fell from the sky like a fierce meteor shower. Boom, boom, boom. A ball of heavenly fire fell on Chernzong's body, and it immediately spread rapidly and burned fiercely. More heavenly fire fell, turning Chernzong into a burning man. He couldn't struggle or move, and the pain was more than doubled. The extreme pain kept attacking him, and Chernzong almost went crazy. At the same time, Chernzong kept holding on, and his eyes became calmer and deeper. Vaguely, there seemed to be a wisp of cold light gathering in the depths of his eyes. The cold light was like the edge of a sword, emitting a terrifying sharpness that was unparalleled. His mind was constantly being sharpened, and it gradually released an astonishing sharpness like a sword being sharpened. Saber punishment. Lightning strike my body. Fire burn my body. They couldn't shake his will. Under the pain of this punishment, Chernzong's spiritual will became more and more condensed, and gradually, a change occurred. A qualitative change. A metamorphosis. His spiritual will was metamorphosing to a higher level. There were different levels of spiritual will, but it was difficult to cultivate. It was closely related to one's daily actions and experiences, and it was constantly and inadvertently tempered over a long period of time. Enduring pain was also a way to sharpen one's spirit and willpower. However, who would put themselves in extreme pain under normal circumstances? No one would do that. It was only when there was no other choice, such as now. In order to break through the 6th level of the misty light realm, one had to endure such pain and torture. The heavenly fire kept falling, spreading rapidly from all directions, completely enveloping Chernzong. It burned wantonly, as if it wouldn't stop until Chen Zong was completely burned to ashes. Fire, fire, fire. Wanton. Wanton. Chen Zong seemed to have lost all his senses. He endured it silently and didn't move. Chapter 1676. The heavenly fire burned the world red, and the ground seemed to have melted. However, the three punishments platform was extremely sturdy and didn't move at all. Chen Zong's figure seemed to have disappeared, leaving behind only a ball of blazing flames that burned incessantly. 10 breaths, 20 breaths, 30 breaths. After burning for a full 100 breaths, the blazing flames did not show any signs of extinguishing, nor did they show any signs of weakening. They were still so blazing and exuberant, as if they would not stop until Chen Zong was completely burned to ashes. There was only a charred piece of charcoal in the center of the blazing heavenly fire. It didn't look like a human at all, and no aura could be sensed from it. Could it be that Chen Zong didn't survive the heavenly fire punishment? However, if he didn't survive the heavenly fire punishment, he should have failed and been sent out. Bang! A sound suddenly rang out. At first, it sounded very faint, but it was especially clear in this absolute silence. Bang! The second voice sounded again, this time much clearer and more forceful. Bang! A third sound rang out, even more powerful. Bang! The fourth sound sounded like the beating of a drum. It beat continuously, becoming more and more powerful. It was the sound of a heart beating. Chen Zong was still alive and hadn't completely fainted. The heavenly fire punishment didn't defeat Chen Zong. A pair of eyes suddenly opened on his charred body. The black and white were extremely distinct and clear, and there was an indescribable firmness and sharpness in them. The sharpness was like the tip of a heavenly sword that could pierce through everything. It seemed to have pierced through the blazing heavenly fire. Then, it gradually receded and returned to normal. Heart like a sword, blade concealing intent. Then, an extremely shocking willpower soared into the sky. Under the vibration, the black chains that bound his body trembled and made violent noises. The two punishment pillars also trembled. Open! With a violent roar, the sound of thunder that seemed to split the world suddenly exploded. An extremely shocking sharpness erupted from the depths of his soul, containing endless and terrifying power. The sharpness of the light was like a storm that swept through the primal chaos. It immediately repelled the blazing heavenly fire, making it unable to affect him in the slightest. The two chains began to vibrate even more violently, as if they were being cut by an invisible blade. Fine cracks began to appear on the chains, and they gradually expanded. Cracks also began to appear on the two pillars. Bang! The two chains and the two pillars also broke apart, shattering one after another. My will is like a sword, incomparably sharp and unstoppable. With a thought, the sharpness of the sword became even stronger, sweeping out in all directions. The pillars of punishment and the chains were completely shattered, and the heavenly fire was also quickly extinguished by the impact. The charred skin on Chen Zong's body fell off bit by bit, revealing his fair and smooth skin, as if he had been reborn. The three punishments platform disappeared, and the primal chaos once again returned to the primal chaos. Chen Zong recovered, and his robe was still intact. It was as if everything that had happened before was just an illusion. However, Chen Zong also felt that it was not an illusion. The pain was incomparably clear, like a brand. His willpower had also become more condensed and pure, and he felt as if he had broken through his limits and reached a higher level. Chen Zong even vaguely felt that his willpower could interfere with the operation of his surroundings, but this feeling was still very faint. No matter what, he should have passed the sixth realm, and he should have benefited greatly. Willpower was extremely important to anyone, especially cultivators. It might not be apparent during normal times, but it was enough to turn the situation around at critical moments. Chen Zong has passed the sixth realm, the Three Punishments platform. Do you want to challenge the seventh realm? The cold mechanical voice immediately sounded, but Chernzong keenly felt that the voice seemed to be less cold, and had a different meaning. The seventh realm is the Black Demon God. You have to do your best to defeat the Black Demon God in order to pass the seventh realm. If you can pass the seventh realm, you will obtain permanent residency on Bewildering Light Island and the right to enter and exit the Bewildering Light realm at will. Chernzong was slightly surprised. This time, the cold voice had more words than before, and the explanation was even clearer. Perhaps this was because the seventh realm was different from the sixth realm? Challenge. Chernzong's tone was still without the slightest hesitation. His ultimate goal in challenging the Bewildering Light realm was to leave the Bewildering Light Sea. At the very least, he wanted to obtain permanent residency and the right to enter and exit the Bewildering Light realm at will. This way, he would not need to go to the Bewildering Light Sea to hunt fog demons or sea beasts. He only needed to stay on Bewildering Light Island and cultivate wholeheartedly. He could also challenge the Bewildering Light realm at any time to train himself, and eventually pass the eighth realm and leave the Bewildering Light Sea. He had to challenge the seventh realm, regardless of whether he could pass it or not. From the voice, Chernzong made some inferences. The seventh realm should be a battle with an existence called the Black Demon God. If he defeated the so-called Black Demon God, he would be able to pass the seventh realm and obtain some qualifications, and be able to challenge the eighth realm. Chaos spread out and a passageway appeared in front of Chernzong again. It was a corridor, and it was pitch black, as if he was walking into a dark abyss. This time there was no light. Chernzong walked forward in the darkness. Only the sound of his footsteps could be heard in this silent darkness, clear and rhythmic. The 999th step. Chernzong remembered very clearly that this should be the last step of the corridor. In front of him were two black doors, covered with strange patterns. They looked very ferocious, like demons from hell, and emitted an extremely cold and cruel aura. Chernzong reached out and placed his hand on the door, only to feel a trace of coldness invading him. Exerting force, Chernzong pushed the two doors open, and a chilly wind swept out, blowing past Chernzong's body, and immediately made Chernzong feel a trace of coldness. However, such coldness was nothing to Chernzong. The door was completely pushed open, and Chernzong stepped in, only to feel that the inside was filled with an astonishing coldness, forming an invisible pressure. The pressure invaded him, as if it was coming from all directions, directly penetrating into his bones and the depths of his soul. There were lights burning all around, releasing a faint blue light, illuminating all directions, allowing Chernzong to clearly see that this was a palace, a spacious palace. Inside the palace, other than the huge pillars, there seemed to be nothing else. No, when Chernzong's eyes swept across, his pupils suddenly shrank. He did not know when, but right in front of him there was a throne. On the throne, there seemed to be a figure sitting upright, as steady as a primordial demon mountain. The aura in the entire palace was radiating in all directions with that figure as the center. The figure slowly rose, as if it was incomparably heavy, bringing with it a terrifying pressure that turned into a storm, roaring and surging in all directions. Every move of the figure exuded an astonishing pressure. "Is this the Black Demon God?" Chernzong muttered to himself. His eyes focused slightly, and he could see even more clearly. It was a figure more than 2 meters tall, looking very burly. He was not wearing any clothes, and his muscles seemed to be cast from steel. The contours of his body were distinct, as if there were volcanoes hidden within. It was fine if they did not erupt, but once they did, it would be earth-shattering. The Black Demon God had a pair of long, black, curved horns covered with spirals on his head. His face was rough, covered with strange black patterns, and he looked like a barbarian from an ancient tribe. His eyes were extremely deep, faintly glowing with a red light. His extremely strong body, which seemed to be cast from steel, was also covered with strange black patterns, like a kind of totem. Under his left shoulder, he wore a blood-red ring that flickered with a strange light. He wore a pair of black animal skin pants, and his calf muscles bulged, also covered with totem-like patterns. Strong, tyrannical, mysterious. It was as if a demon god had descended. This was his opponent and also the target of the seventh realm, the black demon god. Just by sensing his aura, Chen Zong knew that the black demon god was extremely strong, but he could not be sure how strong he was. What he was certain of, however, was that he was definitely much stronger than an ordinary peak ninth heaven saint realm expert, and Tian Jianzi was definitely no match for him. Vaguely, Chen Zong was a little excited. It was an excitement that came from the battle intent in his heart. Intuitively, he knew that this was a powerful opponent. Challenger, you can only enter the eighth realm if you defeat me. The black demon god suddenly roared. The emphasis was a little strange, but Chen Zong could understand what the other party was trying to say. If you want to fight, then let's fight. His battle intent surged, but Chen Zong did not let it get to his head and do anything rash. Instead, he stared at his opponent, constantly circulating the primordial sword origin technique, and mobilizing his strength. He stepped forward step by step. The sunken knight sword returned to its scabbard and could be unsheathed to unleash a powerful slash. Chen Zong's actions were completely different from the black demon god. With a loud roar, the black demon god leaped into the air in an extremely violent and barbaric manner. His body, which was as strong as a black demon mountain, exuded an extremely astonishing pressure. It was as if an ancient mountain was charging over. Before his body arrived, his aura had already caused the void to become heavy, making it difficult for Chen Zong to breathe. Boom! The black demon god raised his right fist high up in the air, and as he descended, he suddenly punched out. This punch was filled with all of his strength as it blasted towards Chen Zong. The void trembled under the terrifying black fist force, almost shattering. Chen Zong's expression changed slightly. Just the pressure released by this punch was much stronger than Tian Jianzi's sky sword path. Faced with such a punch, Tian Jianzi would definitely be beaten to death. However, Chen Zong was not Tian Jianzi. Before this, Chen Zong's strength was much stronger than Tian Jianzi's, and now that his strength had increased, he was even more powerful. Although this punch brought about a lot of pressure, Chen Zong was confident that he could withstand it. His right hand trembled and grabbed the hilt of his sword like a phantom. He suddenly pulled the sunken knight's sword out of its scabbard and turned into a pitch-black sword light. Like a black crescent moon, it tore through the sky with unparalleled power and instantly slashed across the sky. The power that erupted from this sword seemed to be able to split the void in the hall. It was extremely powerful. Boom! The black sword light and the black fist energy collided. Like the beating of a drum, they instantly erupted with an astonishing momentum and power. Chapter 1677. The black chi was like a raging tide, and like an endless stream of light, it roared like a hurricane and swept out in all directions, rushing past the bodies of Chen Zong and the black demon god. The sword and fist collided in an instant. Chen Zong felt his sword tremble violently as an extremely terrifying force suddenly rushed towards him, causing the sword to tremble as it rushed towards his palm, as if it wanted to shatter the bones in his hand. Under the characteristics of the primordial sword origin technique, the sword also cut open the black demon god's fist, leaving a sword mark. A look of surprise suddenly appeared in the black demon god's dark eyes. He was surprised that the sword could injure him, even if the injury was very light. Boom! An extremely terrifying and violent force erupted from the sword and fist, causing the sky to fall and the earth to crack as rivers poured down. The black demon god's extremely strong body resisted the shockwave and did not retreat in the slightest. He raised his other hand and punched at Chen Zong. The terrifying fist pressure made Chen Zong feel suffocated, as if his entire body was about to be shattered. Under the shockwave, Chen Zong floated forward and leaned back. Like a bamboo in the wind, he burst forth with an even more powerful force, instantly rebounding and slashing out with the deep night sword. Limitless. This sword was mysterious and filled with countless sword lights. Each sword contained an astonishing mystery, displaying the technique to the extreme as it charged towards the black demon god. Chen Zong was confident that his current strength, even in terms of qi refinement, was far superior to the Saint Realm, and had even reached the point where he could compete with a one-star half-step great saint. Of course, Chen Zong could not be sure as he had not fought in a real battle, but even if he had not reached that level, he was not too far off. The black demon god's physique was terrifyingly strong, and the power of his black qi was also extremely terrifying and violent, as if it had an unstoppable characteristic, causing Chen Zong to feel extremely pressured. The black demon god's strength was far superior to the Saint Realm, and he might really have reached the one-star half-step great saint level. As the thought flashed through his mind, Chen Zong's sword did not hesitate at all and continued to attack. The infinite sword chain was unleashed as countless sword flashes came at the black demon god from all directions, enveloping him. From time to time, there would be sword flashes that slashed at the black demon god's body, but they only managed to break through a layer of defense and were unable to cause any obvious damage to him. The black demon god's physique was just too powerful. The fierce battle continued without end. The black demon god's physique was tyrannical, his strength was astonishing, and his strength was violent. However, his battle techniques were mainly firm and violent. He did not pay attention to any changes in his fists, and each punch was like a mountain crashing down and smashing everything in its path. No matter how you change, I will break it with a single punch. It was so simple and so tyrannical, yet it possessed such astonishing power. Chen Zong felt as though his sword light was about to be shattered with every punch from the black demon god. Too strong. Not only was his strength tyrannical, but it also contained an unstoppable characteristic. The cultivation technique that the black demon god cultivated was also very brilliant, and was probably not inferior to his Genesis sword technique. Of course, this was also because his Genesis sword technique was not at a high enough level. If it could reach the 31st level, its power would be even more tyrannical, and its earth-shattering characteristic would also be enhanced. However, this cultivation technique was self-created, and it was not that simple to raise its level. He threw away all distracting thoughts and fought with all his might. The black demon god was a powerful enemy, a very powerful opponent, and an opponent that he had to use all his strength to contend against. Boom! 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 The black demon god stood on both feet, as though he had become one with the palace floor. His extremely strong body was like an iron tower, unshakable. His two fists were continuous, forming an extremely violent offensive that attacked like a meteor storm. The power condensed in each punch was something that even a one-star half-step great saint would not dare to underestimate. Chain. The sword light was continuous, and it weakened the black demon god's attack layer by layer, but the black demon god's attack was too violent. Boom! That punch burned with a black force, and it struck down like a black comet. The suppressive bombardment caused Chen Zong's expression to change drastically. He slashed out with his sword, and the black and white were clearly distinguished. Dual Forms Sword Realm. Suddenly, that extremely terrifying punch arrived and bombarded the Dual Forms Sword Realm. Its power was weakened layer by layer, and it was completely blocked. Compared to the Chain Sword Realm, the defensive power of the Dual Forms Sword Realm was undoubtedly many times greater. The black demon god's attack also paused for a moment, and Chen Zong immediately seized the opportunity. He raised his sword high, and endless sword chi, sword light, and sword light unfolded like a scroll, spreading out in all directions. The light became even dimmer in an instant, as though night was about to fall. Slash. In an instant, Chen Zong's sword slashed down, and endless sword chi, sword light, and sword light gathered on the sunken night sword, turning into an extremely thin strand of sword light that was as thick as a strand of hair. It tore through the sky and mercilessly slashed at the black demon god's body. Previously, Chen Zong found it difficult to truly injure the black demon god with each of his sword strikes. Now that he had used his most powerful move, heaven and earth aligned, its power was extremely terrifying, and even Chen Zong did not know if he could injure the black demon god. The timing of this attack was extremely precise. The sword slashed out and struck the black demon god like a hot knife through butter. Its astonishing sharpness, coupled with the characteristics of the primordium sword yuan technique, immediately tore apart the defensive power covering the black demon god's skin. It tore apart the extremely tough skin of the black demon god and broke into his body. There was a ripping sound as though cloth was being torn apart, and a long sword wound appeared on the black demon god's body. Extremely red and boiling hot blood flowed out of the wound like lava. The black demon god lowered his head and stared blankly, as though he could not believe that he had been injured. Roar. An extremely furious roar sounded from the black demon god's mouth. Rage. Rage. Extreme rage. In his fury, the black demon god's originally very strong body swelled up again, and his muscles swelled up like a volcano that was about to erupt with an extremely terrifying power that could destroy everything. Whoosh. Berserk. Chen Zong's expression changed drastically. The aura of the black demon god had increased by more than 50%, and his body had also grown a lot taller, reaching a height of 2.5 meters. His arms had become thicker, and one could vaguely see a terrifying black force surging, gradually spreading to the surface of his skin. As though it had been ignited, it turned into a faint black flame. Burn. It seemed to be a demonic fire that came from the depths of hell. Die. An extremely violent voice sounded from the berserk black demon god's mouth, and the red in his eyes turned into flames that spewed out and burned fiercely. He raised his fist that had become even larger, and his 5 fingers were clenched tightly. A ball of extremely violent black demonic fire that was filled with a destructive aura sword. Boom. Like a world-destroying star falling from the sky, this blow was earth-shattering, and seemed to shatter the heavens and shatter the earth. Chen Zong felt as though he had been blasted into smithereens. This feeling went straight to his soul and mind, and was irresistible. It was all-conquering and unstoppable. This aura was extremely terrifying. It was as if this punch would shatter him into pieces. His entire body would shatter, and his entire soul would be destroyed. The power of Lingwu burst forth. A roar that sounded like a volcanic eruption suddenly sounded, and Chen Zong's chi cultivation power suddenly soared from the peak of the 8th Heaven Saint Rudiment realm to the peak of the 9th Heaven Saint Rudiment realm, and his basic strength increased greatly. Dual Forms Sword Boundary. The black and white chaotic sword halo rotated. The punch, which carried an extremely terrifying power, arrived in an instant and directly bombarded the dual forms sword boundary of the black and white chaotic sword. Chen Zong could feel an extremely terrifying power that caused the sword to tremble, but it was not broken. He blocked it. The mysteries of the dual forms sword boundary seemed to separate time and space, and immediately weakened the violent power of the punch. It was unable to hurt Chen Zong. The furious and violent black demon god's fists continued to bombard Chen Zong, as though he was determined to break the dual forms sword boundary. For a moment, Chen Zong could not find a chance to counterattack. Chen Zong could only consume his strength to maintain the dual form's sword boundary. This was a unique skill that could be used in an instant and stopped in an instant. It could also be maintained to protect oneself. If one kept maintaining it, one's strength would continue to be consumed. While maintaining the dual form's sword boundary, Chen Zong was waiting for an opportunity. Even though the black demon god had become violent, he could not continue to bombard him. There had to be a pause, and Chen Zong only needed a moment to counterattack. This time, it was fine if he did not counterattack, but once he did, he would erupt with an even more powerful force to kill him. The black demon god could not attack continuously. The moment he paused for a moment, Chen Zong immediately counterattacked. Line of heaven and earth. With the eruption of the Lingwu power, the power of the blood thunder explosion also surged into the sword, and a streak of blood-colored lightning flashed. Kill. The power of this sword was much stronger than the previous one. The black demon god was shocked and hurriedly crossed his arms to defend himself. The hair-thin and terrifying sword chi was suffused with traces of scarlet red. It tore through the void and immediately chopped off the black demon god's arm, leaving a sword scar on his chest. Chen Zong unleashed the line of heaven and earth for the second time. The second explosion of his full power had put a huge burden on Chen Zong. The black demon god was in extreme pain after his arm was chopped off, but he was extremely fierce. He used his entire body to crash into Chen Zong. It was as though a mountain was moving, and his momentum was terrifying. Chen Zong retreated slightly to open up the distance between them, and the sword slashed down brazenly. Line of heaven and earth. The power of the blood thunder explosion was integrated into the sword, and it struck the black demon god once again. The third sword. Line of heaven and earth. He would not let go of the opportunity. One of the black demon god's arms was completely chopped off. He roared as though he was weeping blood, but he charged forward fearlessly. His strong body burned with extremely blazing black demonic fire, and his entire body seemed to have turned into a dark meteor that charged forward. Mutual destruction. Chen Zong rapidly retreated. He stood firmly on the ground and held the deep night sword high with both hands. Finally, with the eruption of the Lingwu power, the myriad streams force field, the domain of heart and the blood thunder explosion poured out in torrents without reservation. The myriad streams force field and the domain of heart merged in an instant, and the power of the torrents increased exponentially. They struck the dark meteor, causing it to pause for a moment, and its momentum to weaken slightly. The sword slashed down. The space in the hall seemed to have been split open by this sword. Chapter 1678. First update. Please follow the official account. 6 Realms of Oblivion. You can find out when the update happens. It was unstoppable. Even though it was torn apart, it was as if 2 meteors had bombarded him. Its power was extremely shocking. Chen Zong continuously used the line of heaven and earth. Although the last attack was the most powerful, it was also a sword attack that used up all of his strength. Under the situation where his body-refining cultivation was sealed, his arm trembled slightly for a moment and became numb and stiff for a moment. He used up the last of his strength and barely moved his body. However, he could only avoid half of the meteors and could not avoid the other half. After being hit, Chen Zong felt as if he had really been hit by a meteor. His body trembled violently in an instant and he frantically retreated. An extremely violent force bombarded his body continuously, as if it was about to explode. Steady! You must steady! Chen Zong's entire body was covered in blood as he flew back several thousand meters, crashing into the extremely hard walls of the palace. A huge force entered his back and swept through his entire body. All the bones in his body emitted weak sounds as they shattered. Miserable! At this moment, Chern Zong was still alive, but he was extremely miserable. His body looked as if he had been hit by a meteor head-on. Blood flowed everywhere. His left arm was broken, his chest caved in, and his back was shattered. His injuries were extremely serious, and he was on the verge of death. The reason he was still alive was because Chern Zong's willpower had been honed in the 6th realm and had broken through its original limit to reach a higher level. Although he was drenched in blood, Chern Zong still had a smile on his face. The black demon god was split in half by his line of heaven and earth. Technically, he should be dead. Out of the corner of his eye, he could vaguely see that the two halves of his body had landed in different places. Since he was still alive, he should have won and passed the 7th realm. Everything around him became blurry and the palace disappeared. Chern Zong once again entered the chaos. As the mysterious power descended, Chern Zong immediately felt that his injuries were rapidly healing. His nearly depleted strength was also rapidly recovering. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths, 10 breaths. Chern Zong's strength was completely restored, and so were his injuries. After recovering, he felt that his power had become a little purer. His body seemed to have become a little stronger, and the circulation of his power had become a little smoother. Chern Zong has passed the challenge of the 7th realm Black Demon God and obtained the right to stay on Bewildering Light Island permanently. You have obtained the right to enter the Bewildering Light realm to challenge at will. Do you wish to challenge the 8th realm? The voice sounded. It was less cold and stiff and more gentle. There seemed to be a difference in treatment between those who had passed the 7th realm and those who had not. At the very least, that was the case in terms of the tone of their speech. This indirectly proved a point. Yes. Chern Zong answered without hesitation. He was very determined. He had almost failed to pass the 7th level, and the 8th level would only be more difficult. He might not be able to pass it, but no matter what, he had to try. After all, he had already passed the 7th level and obtained the corresponding qualifications. Even if he couldn't pass the 8th level this time, he had to at least see the difficulty first and experience it for himself. Once he had an idea of how difficult it was, he would know when he came in the next time. The strength that the Black Demon God had unleashed at the end of the 7th realm was at the level of a 1-star half-step Great Saint. It was very powerful. However, all the strength that he had unleashed was also at the level of a 1-star Great Saint. That was why he was able to kill the Black Demon God. The 8th realm, the Absolute Dragon Realm. The voice fell silent and the surrounding chaos changed again. Chern Zong found himself in a volcanic purgatory-like valley. There were countless cracks of various sizes on the ground, and in each crack, there was extremely hot magma flowing. The red light emitted was so dazzling that it was difficult to look at it directly. Standing in this scorched valley, Chern Zong felt an astonishing heat spreading in all directions. He felt like he was about to be roasted. In front of him was a huge volcano. Waves of magma constantly poured out from the mouth of the volcano, flowing down the volcano like a waterfall. Chern Zong's face became extremely grim when he sensed the might of the volcano. Even so, Chern Zong could still withstand it. Then, where was his opponent? Or rather, how was this realm assessed? Just as Chern Zong's cold eyes stared over to search for his opponent, an extremely terrifying aura suddenly soared into the sky from the volcano, accompanied by a violent flood of magma that was 100 meters long. Immediately, Chern Zong saw a huge dragon head appear at the crater of the volcano. The dragon was huge and completely red. Countless drops of red magma were dripping down. Just the dragon head alone was 100 meters long, and its huge eyes were burning with astonishing flames, like heavenly fire. It was hard to imagine that this was just a dragon head. If the whole thing came out, how amazing would it be? Being stared at by the huge eyes, Chern Zong's body suddenly tensed up, as if he was constantly being held tightly by an invisible hand. His muscles and bones were trembling, and his strength was shaking. So strong. So terrifying. Although it was not as strong as the blood-killer King Luoyen, it was still a very tyrannical existence to him. It was completely superior to the Black Demon God. The magma-red dragon's eyes stared and locked onto Chernzong. Immediately, it opened its mouth, and an extremely red flood of flames instantly spewed out from the huge dragon mouth. It was as if a sea of flames was pouring down, crossing the void in all directions and bombarding him with unavoidable bombardment. In an instant, the surrounding magma seemed to be stirred up and vibrated. An extremely terrifying pressure filled the air, attacking and suppressing Chernzong from all directions. Unable to dodge, Chernzong could only watch as the red flood of flames surged towards him. Its speed was astonishing, and its momentum was powerful and earth-shattering. In an instant, Chernzong ignited the power of Lingwu and burst out the power of the blood thunder explosion. He operated the primordial sword yuan technique to the extreme and integrated all his power into the sword. Heaven and earth aligned. This sword was the strongest when the lesser imperial divine weapon could not be used. It was also this sword that killed the 7th realm Black Demon God. The hair-like sword light shot out and instantly collided with the red flood of flames. It was mighty, but it collapsed in an instant. It was as if a large stone had been thrown into the water. It only created layers of ripples and then returned to silence. Chernzong was surprised. The red flood of flames had smashed through all of Chernzong's resistance in an instant. The extremely high temperature and power directly destroyed Chernzong. It was unstoppable. Chernzong could only resist for less than 3 breaths of time before his entire body melted. He lost all consciousness and sank into eternal oblivion. When he regained consciousness, Chernzong appeared in the chaos again. Recalling the scene just now, he immediately revealed a bitter smile. The difference was too great. If the Black Demon God was at the level of a 1-star half-step great saint, then the magma red dragon's strength was at least at the level of a 2-star half-step great saint, or even higher. A difference of a few % in strength was enough to form a suppression. A difference of 2 times was even more shocking. A difference of 2 times was completely crushing. Thinking of this, Chernzong could not help but shake his head and reveal a bitter smile. The 8th realm was indeed very difficult. Moreover, the assessment of the bewildering light realm was closely related to one's cultivation. The higher one's cultivation was, the stronger the corresponding opponent would be. Only under the condition that one's cultivation did not change while increasing one's strength in other aspects to increase one's strength would there be hope of defeating the opponent and passing the 8th realm. Although he had failed, at least he knew that the 8th realm's difficulty was astonishing and gave him a goal to move forward. Only with a goal would one be more motivated. Chernzong has failed to challenge the 8th realm, the Extinction Dragon realm. The highest record is the 7th realm. You can choose 4 heavenly and earthly stone inscriptions. Please make your choice. The voice seemed to carry a trace of undetectable regret. Soon after, 9 stone tablets appeared in the primal chaos. They became clear and were distributed around Chernzong. The color of each stone tablet was the same. They were all a chaotic gray color, but the patterns condensed on them were completely different. Chernzong was not surprised at all. Before entering, Zhao Mingkong had already told him that as long as he passed the 4th realm, he could choose the heavenly and earthly stone inscriptions. Past the 4th realm, he could choose 1. Past the 5th realm, he could choose 2. Past the 6th realm, he could choose 3. Past the 7th realm, he could choose 4. Chernzong passed the 7th realm, he could choose 4. Every single one of the 9 stone inscriptions contained a different profundity. When Chernzong stared at the patterns on the first stone tablet, he instantly felt an extremely sharp light tear through the darkness. It was as if the heavens and earth had been split apart. Endless profundities also surged forth. However, due to the restrictions, he could not comprehend anything. He could only feel it. Silently memorizing it in his heart, Chernzong looked at the second stone tablet. The second stone tablet disappeared instantly, as if it had turned into a sea of fire, burning fiercely. A hurricane blew and the wind roared past. The fire surged and spread continuously, rising higher and higher into the sky, until it finally filled the heavens and earth. A speck of starlight appeared on the third stone tablet. It instantly turned into a stream of light and flew away like a meteor, leaving only a dazzling trail. Immediately, more starlight appeared, like a meteor storm that filled the dark void. At the fourth stone tablet, the dark void was quiet and deep, as if it was frozen. Suddenly, black and white lights appeared and circled around each other, as if a black fish and a white fish were chasing each other. They circled around in the dark void and faintly formed a pattern that was filled with endless mysteries. The fifth stone tablet. From time to time, a pitch-black crack would appear in the dark void. As soon as it appeared, it immediately filled the air with an extremely shocking aura. It was like an open mouth that swallowed all things, swallowing and crushing everything. The fifth stone tablet. Endless lightning flashed. Endless thunderbolts struck down from the sky, bombarding everything. Being bombarded by the violent thunderbolts, it was as if the heavens and earth were about to be destroyed. There were even bits of sparks that sputtered out, gradually forming into sparks. Then, they turned into flames that quickly spread and became raging flames that burned the sky. The sixth stone tablet. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter. All things grew, withered, and died. Rivers flowed, the sun and moon rotated, and the heavens and earth changed. The seventh stone tablet. Hundreds of beasts galloped, roared, and competed with each other. It was a bloody battle in the wilderness. It was incomparably cruel. The eighth stone tablet. The void was like an ocean. Raging waves rose and filled the heavens. Chapter 1679. The 9 stone inscriptions of heaven and earth in the chaotic space each contained different mysteries, but they were all very brilliant. Chernzong could only choose 4 of them to form a brand so that he could study them in the future. So, how should he choose among the 9? Chernzong made his decision without much hesitation. The first stone tablet was as sharp as a knife or a sword. It contained amazing sharpness and mystery, tearing the void and splitting the heaven and earth. The second stone tablet was burning with flames and blowing with strong wind. Obviously, it contained the mysteries of fire and wind. The fourth stone tablet was black and white, which played and intertwined with each other. It should contain the mysteries of yin and yang. The fifth stone tablet was struck by heavenly thunder, which filled the heaven and earth with rolling lightning and blazing fire. It clearly contained the mysteries of thunder and fire. Chernzong immediately made his choice among the 4 stone tablets. When Chernzong made his choice, the 4 stone tablets suddenly shone brightly, illuminating the chaotic space. The light quickly shrank inward and finally condensed into the shadows of the stone tablets, which quickly disappeared between Chernzong's eyebrows and went straight into his spirit sea. Chernzong only felt that there were 4 more stone tablets in his spirit sea. They were the 4 stone inscriptions of heaven and earth that he had chosen. In the future, as long as he concentrated his mind, he could meditate on the mysteries contained in the stone tablets and improve himself. Stone inscriptions of heaven and earth. They contained the mysteries of heaven and earth. Just as Chernzong finished choosing the stone inscriptions of heaven and earth, a beam of light suddenly rushed up from the altar in the outside world. The light instantly exploded with amazing momentum. The first beam. It's coming out. The heaven-battering heavenly king said with a smile. Every person who passed the 4th level of the bewildering light realm for the first time would have a reaction from the bewildering light realm. The bewildering light realm would explode in the sky so that everyone on the bewildering light island would know. You passed the 4th level. Not bad. Zhao Mingkong nodded. Then, the second beam of light rushed up again, which surprised Zhao Mingkong and the heaven-battering king. It was a little unexpected that he had passed the 5th level. It seemed that this man was indeed extraordinary. Then, when the third beam of light rushed up, Zhao Mingkong, the heaven-battering king, and King Hunshan were shocked. The 6th realm. This was the mark of passing the 6th realm. One had to know that on the current Bewilderment Island, there were many that had passed through the 4th realm. Basically, every single one of them had passed through the 4th realm, and there were also many that had passed through the 5th realm. However, there were only a few that had passed through the 6th realm. Previously, the Thunder Fire King had passed through the 6th level and stopped at the 7th level. But now, a junior who had just arrived on Bewildering Light Island and whose cultivation was only at the Saint Realm had actually passed the 6th stage. It was simply inconceivable. Zhao Mingkong or the Heaven-Battering King? Luo Yan, the Blood Killer King in a blood-red robe, narrowed his eyes and became solemn. Both Zhao Mingkong and the Heaven-Battering King had passed through the 6th realm, which was a big threat to him. After all, he had only passed the 6th level. There was no way he could pass the 7th level. Blood Kill King Luo Yan was one of the best 6-star warriors because he had passed through the 6th realm. The other 6-star warriors had only passed through the 5th realm. That was the difference. Another person passed the 6th level? I wonder who it is? There are only a few people who have a chance of passing through the 6th realm. The Thunder Fire King glanced at the sky without any expression. The difficulty of the 7th realm was too high. The Black Demon God's combat strength was amazing and difficult to defeat. The 4th light soared into the sky. Zhao Mingkong and the other two were dumbfounded. The 4th light. This meant that this junior had passed through the 7th realm. How is this possible? It was his first time in the Bewildering Light realm, and he had passed through the 7th realm. It was simply incredible and unimaginable. Thus, no one could remain calm. The Thunder Fire King suddenly raised his head and stared at the sky. His eyes shone with an incomparably terrifying light. As his aura fluctuated, endless thunder fire aura spread out from his body. Arcs of lightning and wisps of flames spread out and hovered around, covering an area of 100 meters. It was extremely terrifying and filled with the power to destroy everything. Shocking. It was hard to imagine the shock in the Thunder Fire King's heart at this moment. In an instant, figures flashed in the Thunder Fire King's mind. They were the few people he saw when he walked out of the Bewildering Light realm. Then, who was the person who had passed through the 7th realm? The Silver Blade King or the Heaven-Battering King? Immediately, the image in the Thunder Fire King's mind froze. An unfamiliar figure with an unfamiliar face appeared. He was very young and had never seen him before. Moreover, his cultivation was only at the Saint Realm. Shaking his head, the Thunder Fire King found it hard to believe. Immediately, his body turned into a scarlet thunderbolt and quickly broke through the sky. His destination was the Bewildering Light realm. In another direction, there were also rays of light that broke through the sky and flew away rapidly. Their destination was also the Bewildering Light realm. Currently, there were more than 100 people on the entire Bewildering Light Island. However, only one person had passed through the 7th realm. That person was the strongest person with a 7-star battle strength, and also the strongest person on the Bewildering Light Island. Now, there was a second one. Who was it? Everyone was curious and wanted to see it with their own eyes. The Blood Killer King Luo Yan's face was extremely gloomy. It was as if there were dark clouds covering his face. There was even a trace of crazy murderous intent in the depths of his eyes. Immediately, the Blood Killer King's figure flashed and turned into a scarlet ray of light. He wanted to confirm who had passed through the seventh realm of the bewildering light realm. Is it him? Is it him? Or was it him? In an instant, a few faces flashed through the Blood Killer King's mind. He eliminated them one by one and finally locked onto one person. It was a very young face, but it was hard to believe. Chernzong certainly didn't know that he would cause such a huge commotion just by passing through the seventh realm of the bewildering light realm. When Chernzong walked out of the bewildering light realm's door, he was instantly slightly shocked, because a few tens of figures had appeared in the surroundings of the bewildering light realm's altar, and every single figure had shockingly formidable fluctuations of aura that rippled out from them. These were all half-step Great Saint experts on the bewildering light island. They were at least 4-star battle strength. None of them was someone he could compare to now. They could easily kill him. At the same time, there was an incomparably powerful aura spreading over from further away. Soon, a ray of light descended. The scarlet ray of light filled the sky like a surging sea of blood. The baleful aura was extremely shocking. It was very familiar. Chernzong immediately looked over and saw a pair of blood-red eyes that were filled with murderous intent. Blood Killer King Luoyen. When Luoyen saw Chernzong, an extremely strong murderous intent and faint uneasiness arose in his heart. The worst thing had happened. It turned out that this person had passed through the seventh realm. This meant that this boy's talent was beyond his imagination. It was terrifying. Then, the Blood Kill King's thoughts changed. The other party was only in the Saint Rudiment realm. The protection period here was only 10 years, at most 10 years. This wouldn't change just because he had passed through the seventh realm. Within 10 years, the Blood Kill King couldn't kill the other party. However, even if the other party could improve in 10 years, it wouldn't be too much. At best, the other party's cultivation would reach the limit of the Saint Rudiment realm. At most, the other party's combat strength would reach the level of 1 or 2 star. He was definitely not the Blood Kill King's opponent. When the protection period was over, the Blood Kill King would immediately kill the other party to prevent future troubles. Otherwise, if such a peerless prodigy was allowed to grow, he would definitely take revenge on the Blood Kill King. Thinking of this, the murderous intent in the Blood Kill King's eyes converged. An extremely violent aura surged like thunder, containing an astonishing blazing aura fluctuation. In the air, there were faint electric arcs and flames flickering and spreading, making everyone feel pressured. Then, a figure descended like a god. The Thunder Fire King. As soon as the Thunder Fire King appeared, his eyes stared directly at Chernzong. His eyes flickered with lightning and flames as if he wanted to see through Chernzong directly. Ha 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 ha, I didn't expect that the person who passed through the seventh realm would be a little friend. A chuckle suddenly sounded, as if it came from all directions along with the wind, making it impossible to tell where it came from. Then, a gust of wind rolled by and a figure appeared next to the altar. It was a middle-aged man in a blue robe. He looked gentle and elegant, very elegant and graceful. Ancient Wind King. The Thunder Fire King spat out 3 words but didn't say anything else. The Ancient Wind King was one of the 3 7-star realm masters on Bewildering Light Island. He had also passed through the 6th realm and stopped at the 7th realm. Therefore, when he learned that someone had passed through the 7th realm, he immediately rushed over to take a look. He didn't expect it to be a Saint Rudiment Realm Junior. Asterisk hua 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 asterisk in the void, the sound of surging waves suddenly rang out. It was as if the waves of a vast sea were crashing down, sweeping across the void. Suddenly, the humidity in the air increased sharply, and everyone could clearly smell the water vapor. Vaguely, there seemed to be the shadow of a mountain moving horizontally. It was extremely heavy and powerful, filling the void with an astonishing pressure. Every inch of it became heavier. The Mountain Sea King. The Thunder Fire King and the Ancient Wind King's expressions didn't change, but their eyes narrowed slightly as their hearts became heavy. The Mountain Sea King. the strongest master on Bewildering Light Island, the strongest 7-star realm master. Once, the Thunder Fire King and the Ancient Wind King joined forces to fight the Mountain Sea King, but in the end, it was a draw. Although that battle was just a test and they didn't use their full strength, the Thunder Fire King and the Ancient Wind King knew very well that their strength was indeed inferior to the Mountain Sea King. Even if they joined forces, they were not confident they could defeat the Mountain Sea King. Very strong. In any case, the Mountain Sea King was the only person on the entire island who had passed through the 7th realm of Bewildering Light Island. The momentum of the mountains and seas swept out, suppressing the sky. Then, a figure slowly descended from the sky. It was an old man in a white robe. His white robe seemed to have layers of white waves on it. On it, there were layers of black mountains that stood at the end of the sea. The coexistence of mountains and seas. Greetings, Mountain Sea King. Everyone saluted. Even an arrogant person like the blood-killing king had to put on a show. After all, the Mountain Sea King was the strongest master on Bewildering Light Island. The gap between a 7-star realm master and a 6-star realm master was definitely much greater than the gap between a 6-star realm master and a 5-star realm master. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.